A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. That week, that week. That would be.
Are you having a stroke?
Chapter. No, not right now. That would be through chapter 36. So we're talking about chapters 33 through 36. This is our penultimate episode covering Mistborn: The Final Empire by Branderson. Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm that week, this week, that week, this week, that week, this week. I'm PJ. Crossland, I'm concerned for your health, and I've already called an ambulance, so we have to record this quickly before they get to you.
There's no way we're getting through it all. That's all I'm saying. And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club. And I want to remind people that on the top of this episode, a couple of things. One, PJ is a new reader to the scene, so it's important that we give him kindness in anything that he says. That's part
Are people
of the fun
shitting on me?
People aren't shitting on you; they're shitting on us collectively.
Okay.
So it's important to note that every once in a while we're drinking while we're doing this. We get mistakes wrong. We get things wrong. We eventually correct them, generally, including a correction that I have from a previous episode that hasn't been brought up to me or anything like that inside of this episode that we'll make. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But I also want to say that if you like nerdy corrections, go watch Dropout TV's Actually, because that sounds exactly like your thing. I'm gonna cross promote something else to dissuade from making fun of us. Sometimes we get small details wrong. I'm sorry that we accidentally were talking about Darrow being 6'3" for a while when he was actually 6'11". My bad. We corrected that 2 episodes later.
Yeah.
Full rant. Over.
Okay.
That was episode 5. Leave us alone.
You're reading the YouTube comments again, aren't you, Crossland?
I love everyone who listens to us through YouTube. I absolutely love it. I've came to realize I commented on the very first thing that I've ever commented on YouTube before. And it was a very good, well thought out comment of the reason that I like something and the reason that I appreciated something inside of the Wheel of Time TV show. And I said, this take isn't for everyone, so bear with me. And I prefaced it with that being you don't need to agree with me. And still people were underneath the comments being I think that's fucking wrong. And I was that's not, I don't care. That wasn't the point. The point was I wanted to voice that I liked this decision as opposed to other people who don't like that decision. And that's okay. I understand where you're coming from. I just don't agree. Don't need to shout about it. And that in combination with this other comment that came up on our 5th Red Rising episode, I was love you, dude. Really appreciate you listening. We do correct it. Mm-hmm. Give us time and understand that people are fallible.
I mean, yeah, but we're more fallible than a lot of people. We fuck up pretty regularly, I'd say, on a pretty regular basis. But you guys listening might not get all of that because we also go through and comb our episodes. In our editing process, we make sure to clean things up. We'll take breaks and we'll go off into random
MCR rant
tangents.
For 20 minutes. Yeah.
Was it 20 minutes? Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also drinking constantly throughout this whole thing. That's kind of the premise of the show. So we get off topic, and sometimes we have to rein it in after the fact. So we know what we say, and sometimes if we catch that we fuck up, we'll just cut it out entirely.
And sometimes we'll leave it in, and then we'll address it later. We promise.
Yeah.
And if we don't, feel free to bring it up to us. But the way you do it is important.
I'm cool with whatever brash way you want to bring it up, but just make sure that we haven't addressed it in the future. You know?
Also true. Listen to it all. Yeah. Okay, cool. PSA out of the way. So today is our 9th episode, our penultimate episode, discussing Mistborn: The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and we are going to chat about chapters 33 through 36. This is the beginning of the so-called Sanderlanche, as people like to term the climaxes of Brandon Sanderson's books. And I feel very rude for interrupting it, actually. I called you this morning, or rather, we decided to call each other, and someone answered and someone called this morning, and I almost said read to the end because I was maybe we could fit this all in one episode reasonably. It'd be a long one, but we could do it. And at the same time, I was like, I kind of want to leave you on the cliffhanger that I'm leaving you on. So,
Damn.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't settle that until right now. Well, before, but So before we get into that, though, let's talk about what we're drinking. PJ, what are you kicking us off here with?
I'm drinking a cocktail that you sent to me, actually. We were discussing, I was going shopping, and I'm like, just walking through the grocery store, and I'm like, I think you were in my head, like you were in my ears the entire time I was in the grocery store.
Correct. That totally makes sense.
And just idly, I asked you what I should drink tonight, and you sent me this recipe, and I had most of it, but I needed seltzer water, so you sent me the Fernet Fizz. I made a double just because I know how we go through cocktails and how quickly, and it was a pretty small cocktail by the sound of it. So I made a double batch for what it's worth. 2 ounces of bourbon. I used the Pinhook bourbon that Crossland's been talking up for a while. I finally saw it on my liquor store shelves.
You can hear us talk about the Pinhook at length in our Devil's Cuts if you are one of our patrons.
Correct.
We actually did a taste test, side by side.
The Devil's Cut for this episode, specifically.
This one, yeah.
So 2 ounces of bourbon, 1 ounce of Fernet Branca, and thank you for helping me get rid of this fucking Fernet Branca.
I'm trying.
We've had it for so long.
I can't wait until you want to buy another one for a specific cocktail. Like,
nope, I'm done with Fernet.
I'm beginning to like Fernet, actually, in a strange
way. I kind of am, too. Specifically in this cocktail. Yeah. I think the trick is pairing it with lemon.
We keep interrupting you. Go through your cocktail.
No, it's all good. All right. I'll start from the beginning once more. 2 ounces of
with feeling
Pinhook bourbon. Fuck. 2 ounces of Pinhook bourbon. 1 ounce of Fernet Branca. 1 ounce of simple syrup. 1 ounce of simple syrup. Half an ounce of lemon juice. 1 egg white. 4 dashes of orange bitters. And I should have done a dry shake, but I put ice in there first. So shook it all. What?
That's probably what actually affected your color. We were talking about this earlier. That's probably
actually,
what
that's probably what it was. Yeah. So should have done a dry shake, didn't. So shook that and then poured it into a white wine glass and then topped it off with LaCroix Pure. So just seltzer water.
Yeah, this is really cool when you pour the seltzer on top of the egg white. That's when it creates that fizz, that bubble, that foam on top, especially if you dry shake it. I fucked up a couple of times and I made a couple of fizzes.
This didn't do it. This didn't do it right.
That's why you got the color. Because that also happened to me with the Strawberry Sovereign that I made when we did it on the episode, and I was like, it looks so pale and awful. And that's because fucking didn't do the dry shake.
And I didn't get like the characteristic foam of a fizz. So I'm wondering if that has to do with it. I'm wondering if it's, I don't know. I opened the can of LaCroix a little bit early, so maybe it degassed a little bit more than it should have. Whatever it was. I don't know. But it tastes really good. It's this herbal, lemony, sweet thing that tastes really good. I've only had a couple sips of it so far. Let me taste it right now. So, yeah, it almost tastes like a little bit more of an herbal iced tea. I think that's how I would describe it in like the best possible way. It's really, really good.
That's so interesting because mine also has like an interesting iced tea-ish flavor. That's actually kind of what I was thinking. So the same kind of like herbal notes, which we're both using Pinhook in ours. So that's probably a part of it. That's probably a part of that base flavor profile of the whiskeys. You're using bourbon, I'm using the rye. But what are you following that up with before we jump anywhere else? I'm super excited. I'm so glad that you did this fizz, by the way. Like,
yeah, I
was going to make it at some point. This is from, both of our cocktails are actually either from or variations on How to Cocktail by America's Test Kitchen, which is a fantastic, it is in my head, it is the best intro cocktail book ever. Teaches you how to make everything, teaches you the reasons that you would do certain things. Not the most, it has a ton of historical drinks and like some prohibition stuff and some interesting history. Not the most deep book, but a wonderful book to get you started.
Yeah, I might seek that out.
You're following it up with
Aslan Brewing Company or Aslan Beer Company collaboration with Fürst Weissig out of Berlin. Volcano Sauce Sour Ale brewed with blackberries, blueberries, milk sugar, and vanilla. So nice sour volcano sauce.
That is a really cool looking can.
I love Aslan's can art. It's a sweet pastry sour. Like, what else do you want? It's really, really good.
Okay, I'm going to hop into my cocktail. So I am having a spin on the Chancellor, which is a cocktail that is generally made with scotch. I didn't have any scotch, and I kind of want to do this pinhook experiment and kind of play around with it a little bit. So I've spun off the Chancellor into something that I'm calling the Lord Prelin. And so after Tavidian here, our character who dies at the end of this chapter, we've already named a cocktail, the Survivor Hathsin. We'll probably name another one after him at the end of this, something like that. We're trying to stir on something to give Kelsier appropriately, but this is what we're doing today is the Lord Prelin. So what I'm drinking here is 2 ounces of rye whiskey as opposed to the scotch. I'm having the Pinhook, 1 ounce tawny port, ½ ounce of dry vermouth, 1 bar spoon of simple syrup or 1 teaspoon, it's about the same, and 2 dashes of orange bitters stirred with ice, served without the ice. What's interesting is when I tried this cold, I was meh on it. Like, it's a good drink, it's complex, but now that it started to warm up, it's better. It's wider.
Interesting.
Like, it woke up.
I mean, that's what cold does.
Yeah.
It'll suppress flavors.
So, yeah, it really suppressed the flavor. The rye comes through so much more now, and it was cutting through the port before, but now I'm getting the roundness of the port. I'm getting the full mouthfeel of that side of the cocktail, and the rye and some of the spices come out there, and the simple syrup, and like just that touch of sweet that isn't super necessary. I'd almost be curious as to what it tasted without it. Like, I'd almost do a try to see if you needed it at all.
Yeah. Interesting.
I'm following that up with Flying Machines Roswell 1954 Vanilla Porter. It looks like a haunted landing of a UFO, like landing on the grass, but it's got an airplane inside, which is just fucking ridiculous. It's really solid. It's a great. I picked a porter out because we talk about IPA so much, and we've talked about this previously. I wanted to mix it up a little bit and pick a vanilla porter. Yeah. So that's the gamut on drinks. With that, we move into PJ's predictions. Mm-hmm. So this week, we're going to pay off a number of them, which is why I'm making such a big deal out of it, of course. So the first one here, PJ, I'm going to read the question. You'll read the answer, of course. The Lord Ruler having this massive soothing effect on this populace is certainly a little thing to note here that we don't want to skip over. If he can do something like that, what other things do you think he can do? And you didn't really answer the immediate question, but you did pose kind of a different question in answer. Pose your answer.
And it was wrong. I'll say that right away. I'm drinking for this one. But my answer was along the lines of, this is interesting to me, and I'm curious if this is an active power or if it's something more passive or even somehow imbued on Creedic Shaw itself. So,
yep.
I've continued to follow that thread of like Alamantic powers being imbued upon non-sentient objects. And I think even later in this episode, I'll talk about my sort of thought process on the Inquisitor's eyes and whether or not that falls into this, or whether it's just, hey, those things are fucking metal. Maybe they're the source. So,
yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Not answered, but also the way I did answer it was wrong.
So that's a drink for you. With that,
unless it's on his horse or his carriage.
My fucking how
the stable is central to Creedic Shaw itself.
Nope. Moving on. The fun bit of information here is interesting. That of manipulating bones and corpses. Of course, we end up talking about Khandra in kind of the side here. We don't know that term yet, but I asked thoughts, and you said
that it could help explain Lord Renew, but it doesn't explain his mind. Something fucky is up here.
This is interesting because I think that you are right, but you didn't fully answer the question in the way that it was meant to be answered. So we're going to push on this one, which means we both drink in any circumstance like this. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a combination of asker and answerer. Next one here. There's a reflection as the Pac-Men are loading and sharing a private conversation about Kelsier and how his legend has grown to almost supersede that of the rebellion. And my question for you is, do you think Kelsier is a good choice for a ruler? What do you make of their conversation?
So my answer was, I don't know if he's a great pick for leader. He seems too well suited for being on the streets rather than pulling some strings from a boardroom. But I don't know if there's a better candidate for rallying the people. He's one of the best. He's the one with the best shot, but he's not the best pick, if that makes sense.
Kelsier's dead, so fuck you.
Yeah, that's the shittiest reason why I have to drink for this.
We had to get rid of this one somehow, and this was the only way that was going to happen. I think I agree with you in context in terms of what you're saying, but I'm giving that one to you.
Fine.
People can disagree in the comments, but as long as they do so politely.
Not be mean. Be mean to Crossland for this one.
So next up here is one that we just want to address. So Marsh's note details an interesting question. Where does the power difference of an Inquisitor come from? Why are they so much stronger than traditional Alamancers, and how do they recruit the Mistborns into their agency? You said...
My answer was, I think they're made, not found. And the reason why we decided to address this, as opposed to actually like make a decision on it, is because there's nothing contextual saying that they're strictly made. But there's like, it feels like there's heavy implications of that. And how do you answer that with that sort of amount of information?
Yeah, so we're going to keep this one on the list for the time being, but there is an implication based on what the Lord Ruler says that they are hard to replace, which makes it seem as though they are replaceable, but how does that work? How could he replace them?
Like, does it need to be a Mistborn that's like taken and found and turned into an Inquisitor? Is that the potential fate of Vin? If so, why was Kelsier not like taken and like molded into an Inquisitor? If like there's some sort of mind breaking that goes into it, I don't like. There's a lot of questions here, but it doesn't quite answer whether or not they're made or recruited. I don't know, but there does seem to be a bit of manufacturing that happens. Look at their eyes. Look at their hands. I don't know. There's something unnatural.
For sure. It is, like you said, I think that you nailed it in all contexts. Like, we have ideas, but we don't have an answer. And that's why I wanted to bring this one up, is because I think it's unique versus a number of the other predictions, which are pretty... Like, we're trying to approach this kind of a la carte style in its own way. Like, we're getting bits and pieces, but we haven't gotten the full answer yet. We've gotten more questions, to be honest, than we have answers. So that's why we wanted to bring it up. We're going to keep it, but we wanted to just re-mention it.
Right.
With that, we go into Chapter 33. We return to the crew, sans Kelsier, who have been locked in Clubs' shop since the reveal about the tragic death of Marsh that we experienced at the end of last week. But Vin takes this moment to recognize something that, in hindsight, is kind of tragic, but on the outset is really hopeful. She hopes to be a part of Kelsier's next crew, next job, everything and the like. It's another one of those warming moments where Vin has moved from looking to escape every room to staring around at all of her friends and not wanting to leave or for it to end. And I just wanted your thoughts.
Yeah. This scene evokes a lot of truth from the crew, I think. Like, we get to see their true colors a little bit more. There's sort of the tough guy talk earlier, and I don't know if tough guy is the right way to put it, but there's the talk earlier about how they felt duped almost by the idea that they wouldn't be getting their payout that they were promised from the beginning. But in the end, they all kind of would have done this job anyway. And this job is so much more meaningful that it was worth whatever risk that was involved. And this had amazing, like, incredible risk with very little reward. Not that they weren't, like, they were promised a reward, and maybe that's what brought most of them in, but to know that in hindsight they would have done it anyway.
That's what's really warming at the end of this, right? Like, we're nowhere near that yet in terms of narrative, but right now, I've made reference to it a couple of times as we've been going through the series, but there have been moments and stopping points where we've been in Clubs' shop, or we've been at a bar, we've been hanging out with characters, and they've been drinking, they've been having a good time. And I think the last time that I talked about this was like our episode 7 or something like that, when the crew is together and happy and rejoicing in success right before they get the news of the failure that is Eden taking the army out, right? So that was the last time where everyone was happy, everyone had a second to kind of be focused in, and I wanted to make sure to clarify that, to say this is everyone at their best. And right now, we've got everyone around, they're all happy to still be there, and Vin in particular doesn't want this to end, but she's noticing that change for the first time ever and things starting to resolve and that to start to shift. And
yeah, like if we look at the beginning of the book, it's amazing how well she's assimilated into this group from there. Like that point was not approachable. She was not a team player for the most part. Like, yeah, she had to work in teams. Like she had to work for crews, but
she had more in common with Golem at that point than she does with who she is now.
Yeah, exactly. And now she's basically found her family, for the lack of a better term, or maybe for exactly the right description of that term. Like she has found her family, and now it's slipping from her, and that's tough to deal with.
Yeah. Man, and they're cooped up, of course, not having the best time when our boy Kelsier finally steps back. It's brutal to call our boy at this point when he dies.
Dead boy.
Our dead boy. Our boy, our martyr, finally steps back through the doors, exhausted from Pewter dragging his way from the pits of Hathsin, where we saw him at the end of last week. Kelsier, of course, explains this to everyone, what he's done, destroying the pits, pulling them, and explaining the reason that Alamancers couldn't do it as well, and how that will set back the Final Empire's mining of atium for centuries. The implications here, of course, are wide-reaching, but the group is of the opinion that they should be pulling out right now of the heist in this whole plan instead of committing further. This is an interesting turning point, because Kelsier obviously wants to turn the screw the other way.
Yeah. I love the way that Branderson does humor on a really kind of subtle scale, but it's prevalent. There's quite a bit of these sort of humorous outbursts, and the one here is the fact that Breeze is kind of going off on Kelsier hyperbolically about like the stupid things he could have gotten into, like stealing the cloak off the Lord Ruler's back. And just the air getting sucked out of the room when he quietly answers, "No, I destroyed the pits of Hathsin." Fuck.
He set up a good group of characters that way, where like Breeze can say something like that and you totally believe it, and then Kelsier's like, "No, here's the honest truth." And everyone, there's always the air that Kelsier might be joking, but this, because he gets down into that quiet, serious mode, you're like, "Oh, that's resonant, that's real," and everyone else also recognizes that. So many, I find often in inexperienced fantasy when I read it, or inexperienced novelists in general, this status play of seeing where the power is instead of a rumor or a conversation is so important. And this is a great example of that. And Kelsier's ability, because of his sort of prominence and title, being able to suck that out of the room and kind of take all the power away from everyone and make it so they're listening to whatever he has to say next.
Yeah.
Here. Of course, Kelsier has to go to bed because he's fucking tired from pewter dragging, as any reasonable Alamancer would know. Of course, we are reasonable Alamancers. But as I was saying, as I was transitioning through talking about the distances and things like that, the next day, Vin and Sazed share a conversation about the 11th metal and its potential, and how the Keepers have heard no mention of it. This poses a question to us, of course. Where did Kelsier hear of the 11th metal? How could he know its use? And do you have any ideas about that? I'm going to let you in on something, PJ. You're making a prediction for a short story that we're going to stuff in at the end of this trilogy. So we're going to get an answer here. There's a short story that I have not put on the docket yet.
I was curious why you in our document, he italicizes things that are going to be predictions that we're going to address later. And this one's italicized, and I was curious why. That makes sense.
This is specific to the 11th metal, of which I literally just read this week.
Like, he doesn't know the use, clearly, like you mentioned, but as far as how he knows about it, that's something that I never even considered. I'd be curious if it's anything to do with as a result of burning gold in a weird way. Like maybe he got into conversations with an alternate itself, and he mentioned that he doesn't think gold is really useful at all, but maybe he's just hiding that for some reason.
There's always another secret.
There's always another secret.
It's Kelsier's catch line, right?
Yeah. So if somehow he's getting external information through gold that's giving him access to information on this 11th metal, which Vin posits is an alloy of gold later on in this section, that it's not inconceivable. That's where I'm at on it. Is for some reason he's hiding the fact that he's getting actually important information through the use of gold.
Okay. All right. I'm in. I just wanted to make sure that we got that down because we will be reading that short story after I read it this week. We're interrupted inside of the next day by Taze, another Tin Eye, who is on the watch, saying that more people are being gathered in the square for execution. They quickly wake Kelsier. He immediately takes the blame. After all, it does appear to be a reaction to what he did in the pits. Do you agree with him? Interestingly enough, we actually get the answer kind of in general in this section, but do you agree with the way that he thinks about it himself?
Of course. Like, what else would it be? Man, like, Kelsier is high profile enough. I would assume the Lord Ruler is just kind of waiting for something like this to happen before, like, stomping on him like a cockroach. You know? And he's high profile enough that I don't believe that he's acting like under the nose of the Lord Ruler without being noticed at all. I think I'll get into this quite a bit later, but I think that's ultimately why the Inquisitors seem so eager to kill him. Because, like, they have the resources, they have the ability, they probably explicitly know exactly who's doing all this shit. They know it's him, but the Lord Ruler isn't, like, giving them the go-ahead for reasons that... This is a whole web of shit. This is a whole web of shit that I'm gonna get into, but it all relates later on. But just the idea that the Lord Ruler is kind of counting on the fact that the nobles cull themselves every 100 years or so. Kelsier's letting, like, kind of ushering that along in time properly. So, like, if the Lord Ruler isn't threatened truly by anything that Kelsier is doing on a personal level, why fuck with it if it's helping him out in some meager way? So
that's an interesting perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's above it all, right? Like, he
is not threatened at all.
As we see later, he is literally... We've like made jokes about, like, the possible perception of the Lord Ruler, and when he shows up, he's as invincible as they said. He's as invincible as the legends. Like,
yeah.
Wow. Shocking.
It was... We'll definitely get more of that. But this answer for me... Like, my reasoning for this answer is so tied to what happens later that it's hard to really make a not.
Well, and we get the strict answer later. This wasn't his plan to, like, this wasn't actually a response to the pits. This was him catching something else and punishing something else. This is not the pits, which is what Kelsier's kind of taking for.
I feel like I missed that. What was...
Because the Lord Ruler doesn't know about the pits yet. That happens later when they're up in the spire. He doesn't know about the pits.
So what was this about? Do we know that?
This is just a trap that he had laid for Kelsier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this
actually fucks with my answer. That entirely fucks with my answer.
No, the reason that I think that it was reasonable with your answer is because Kelsier believes this holistically, right? Like, he believes that that's the reason and is, like, led into this trap regardless, but then we get the spook side of the trap. We get the renew side of the trap, which, you know... Upon seeing those prisoners, most of the members jump into action. Kelsier knows that he needs to intervene and save them, feeling responsibility falling on his shoulders. Like we're saying with the Pits of Hatson thing, he's thinking that this is why he needs to do this. Well, in fact, this is all actually a trap. Ham heads off to rally with some troops, but before the dust really settles, Kelsier and Vin share what will be their final exchange. We only know this in post, so it's important that we talk about it. This is ultimately why I group these chapters and not leaving you on the cliffhanger that you mentioned a little bit later, is because I think it's important that we talk about these moments in sequence. We talk about this final conversation that they have and his death. So final note here, you still have some things to learn about friendship, Finn. I hope someday you learn what they are. And that is, like, Kelsier has generally been very approachable and very kind and forgiving, and this is harsh. That is a harsh reality to be thrown in her face. It's very real, intense. What do you think he was going for by saying this?
I think he pretty explicitly mentions that he let her stop him earlier in that moment where he was going to run off for the garrison or for the army. But I think what he's saying is that sometimes you need to take dire risks for your friends, even if you know it's going to be your downfall. Like, putting them above you is sometimes the right thing to do.
Is the nature of friendship to some degree. Like that is an extremely close friendship, especially with Spook. Like that's our counter in Renew.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of the times. And it would be very easy for Kelsier to, or from Vin's perspective, I guess, we know a little bit more context later on for Kelsier's perspective, but from Vin's perspective, it'd be really easy for Kelsier to just say, I can't risk myself here because I have too many big things balancing right now that I need to take care of. So I can't risk my life and let those fall to the wayside as well, which is a valid point. And I'm trying to decide whether or not it shoots it like that idea and that lesson shoots itself in the foot when we learn that this was like Kelsier's plan the entire time to basically sacrifice himself.
It's so interesting, especially when we learn that this is his plan the entire time, right? It's an interesting conflict of perspective, right? Vin's perspective has always been on survival. Even with friends, she's still hell-bent on preserving the friends that she can save. And so in this moment, it feels like another moment where she can intervene with Kelsier, be like, hey, keep yourself alive. We can't keep Spook alive. It's unfortunate. We can't do anything about it. We're going to lose them.
I think it's a step further than what you just said. And I know you agree,
right?
But that she can save without risking her own life.
Right.
Like without sacrificing herself, what she can save.
And I think
there's that caveat.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
that's Kelsier's counterpoint entirely. Totally agree. Kelsier's counterpoint is this is the moment when you step up. You've got like a fucking golden halo of nuclear energy behind you. It's hilarious. This is the point when Kelsier really like step up and stand out. This is your time. This is when you stand up for people. This is when you take the risk that exceeds yourself. And that's really great from his perspective, a really hard lesson to her. And I think that's what like different, I internally make the joke that this is like the Obi-Wan sacrifice, right? But this is more than the Obi-Wan sacrifice because this is a tougher lesson that he's imparting is the importance of friendship and the people that you care about and what you sacrifice for the people that you care about. Even if it was his plan the entire time, he is pushed to maybe execute it sooner because of the situation. And that's my perspective. It's not perfect. It's not holistic. There are definitely other things, but that's the way I think about this phrase.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, God. It's so good. It's so good. The end of Sanderson's books are so good. And it's all because he does all the prep work. Cool. All right. I love that last interaction. So it's ultimately, by the way, why I decided not to end it with Kelsier's death or with this like end of this chapter, by the way.
Yeah.
Is because of this juxtaposition that I think is really important for us to spend time and break down. Then begins something within the fandom that is referred to as the Sanderlanche. We whiplash, kind of, from perspective to perspective with kinetic action carrying us through the beat of the rest of this chapter. Kelsier downs vials and tears apart soldiers, mashing them into the ground and freeing some prisoners before he's confronted by an Inquisitor, metal spikes for eyes shining underneath the brown cloak over his head. And it's all a trap, once again. I just want to, real quick, this is fucking Star Wars Episode 6. Like, this is the beginning of that, but the opposite. Mm-hmm. Like, walking into the trap as opposed to setting the trap yourself. And I love that for characters quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's got that same, like, disposition of treating the soldiers like meat. Like, just, like, props. Like,
yep.
You fucking throw Boba Fett into the Sarlacc, it's the same idea.
Same shit.
Yeah.
Same shit. But Sanderlanche, I like that term. All I'm thinking is like Sanderland Ranch, I guess, is like what my brain goes to. I don't know why.
Okay. All right.
It's splitting it for some reason. Fuck, I don't know.
It's interesting.
The Sanderland Ranch. But this scene is just so like perfectly cinematic. The way it's jumping perspectives, like it is in my head. I would liken it to maybe not quite with as much action, but the way it flows very much like the single shot Avengers action sequence from the first movie.
It's actually a great call. Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's just like the camera's just following and like jumping to and from each character without actually cutting. I don't know. I loved it. Fucking everything about this story, man. Like, thank you, but fuck you for getting me into shit like this.
Again, appreciate it. I'm glad that this, I've said it before and I'll say it again. We had 4 incredible picks for what we're going to do next. Ultimately, a tiebreaker, very close between Mistborn and the First Law. And I'm glad we get to do this. I'm glad we get to talk about Mistborn. I'm very glad that I was encouraged to read the Second Era, and so now we're covering that. But I really love Brandon's action because it is so cinematic. This is fucking screenwriting 101 here to me. Like, this is stage direction and intent and moments, and he kills that blend of filmic TV, like cinematography, with book writing. It's so good.
Does he have a background in it?
No.
Interesting.
I know. You would think he does. This is technically, I think, his 8th or 9th novel, I think in order of that he'd written but not published. He was published on his 8th novel, if I remember correctly. Elantris was his first one. This is his 2nd published book. So, as like a 28, 29-year-old, again, making me very sad.
Yep.
But yeah, it's so good, so good. I described it as whiplash. That's not right. But it does feel jarring and intentional. Like, Whiplash gives it this overcorrection feeling, but it's meant to like pull you around the scene. It's a small detail, but during the confrontation with the Inquisitor, I really appreciate the smirk that accompanies the line from him saying, "I won the draw to kill Kelsier." It gives it this like sinister undertone. I really appreciate that, as though it was insignificant enough to not require more than one of them, but also a prize to be won, to be the one to put down the survivor of Hathsin. It's so fun. Vile.
Yeah. I think I entirely agree with you on your point of like the insignificance of the threat. I think I also believe that the Inquisitors probably wanted to take him down for a long time. Like I mentioned before, finally now the Lord Ruler is giving them the go-ahead. And I think, the Lord Ruler, like I mentioned, seemed to kind of build it into his calendar that the noble class kind of has to call themselves every 100 years or so, every century. And Kelsier's helping that along. He's starting this house war. And he's not really posing a real threat to the Lord Ruler himself in a cosmic sense, I guess. Why bother spending the time and effort to like squash him when he's weirdly helping him out? The Inquisitors. Really yeah. I don't know. I'm getting some weird thoughts on the Lord Ruler and like what he is, but it's hard to,
and what he knows, right? Like there's
shit like that. Yeah, exactly. But we get some later information that tells us that the Inquisitors seem to be a little bit more driven by rules as opposed to making decisions based on like what's best for the realm or what's best for the city or what's best for the Lord Ruler or whatever. Like they have a set of rules and they're following them. They kind of seem like darker or maybe not really even darker versions of the judges from Judge Dredd.
Is, I think, such an apt comparison, right? Because if you think about it, the judges in Judge Dredd, or in Dredd, highly recommend, by the way, if you watch Alex Garland. I mean, not Alex Garland, but really it's Alex Garland's Dredd. I think it was directed by somebody else, but technically I think that director in the commentary bailed midway through, and Alex Garland, the writer, had to pick it up, and that's when Alex Garland was given directorial creds. He did Debs, he did Ex Machina, he did
fucking Debs,
a number of things that we fucking love. Yeah, that's Debs started the show. We talked about that a couple of times. Debs started the show.
Yep.
So, but yeah, so using the Judge Dredd comparison, I think, is immaculate because there's an almost pseudo-religious thing there with the judges, with the way that they kind of adhere to the law and treat that as the holy book in their own rights. And I think here, obviously, the Inquisitors, as we get a peek behind the curtain, are very much like the enforcers of the religion in a crazy way. Like they are, it's so interesting. It's so cool. Yeah. You get a picture into the Final Empire in a big way here.
So it feels like they're the ones that this is for. You know, it doesn't feel like the Lord Ruler really gives a shit at all about these uprisings or about these infractions upon their society, because he's more or less not a part of this society.
Again, I think that this gets back to our differential that we had this conversation, I think in episode 8 or 7, about Tavidian, right, as the Lord Prelin, as like the Pope, basically, in its own kind of way. I don't think he gets enough attention in this novel to honestly like call him something like that. But from titles, we can call him the Pope-like person. And the Lord Ruler is God, truly. And God is indifferent and non-caring until it's confronted directly with him from his angels. We could call the Inquisitors. You know, like it's a stretch, of course, but like if you start to make those parallels, it's very interesting with a physical religion. So, man, it is. It's dude was onto something here. So, of course, this melee continues. Ham soldiers arrive as backup. Breeze soothes the warriors out of combat, convincing some Ska and noblemen to leave. And Vin lends her help as well, listening into that and thinking about the idea of like there being other ways to get people out of this situation. We cut back to Kelsier's perspective, and all while he's fighting, he hears Ellen Ventures shouting for Valette, trying to help the house renew, trying to get to the bottom of the situation in the most noblemanly way possible, before finally engaging one with an Inquisitor with a fierce... Before Kelsier finally engages one-on-one with a fierce, all right, let's do it. But that all right, let's do it then is such an interesting... It's such a... There's so many fighty words that are used in this last page of this chapter.
Yeah. Fighty words.
Fighty words. They're fighty words.
They are fighty words. But it's so much action and so much scene setting and progression that all culminates into this. And this is like the perfect endpoint for a section for us. And I was genuinely surprised. I know you've talked about that quite a bit already, but I was genuinely surprised that this wasn't like the end of a section for us.
I heavily considered adding these pages on to last week and like dividing up chapters a little bit different.
I feel like that would have made this week weird.
What it would have done is it would have changed. We would have put chapter 33 on the end of last week, right? And then we would put 34 through the end on this week. Okay. So we would have had a much longer stretch to round out this conclusion. And that has its benefits. It has its weaknesses, because I think that the curiosity going into the next section is huge, even though it's only 40 pages. Like, even though it's not that much, I think it's worth it.
Could you have imagined adding another chapter to last week's episode?
Well, not under the circumstances in which we recorded, but in theory, based on the notes, yes, I could totally imagine another chapter. Oh, yeah. But recording it the way that we did, fuck no. Heads up, apologies. We did great, considering my state. PJ was upset with me. not that he vocalized that directly, but you could hear it when I was editing it. It was like, oh, this is my fault. My bad. Because my skin crawled.
I was not mad. I was not mad at you.
No,
I was
but
not upset with you at all.
You were edging on some questions of being like, "Why the fuck are you asking me this?" Thank God I got to clean out the last hour. But
the last hour, the last fifth of the episode.
It's true. It's true. I gotta flip.
What did it come out to? Like 2 hours and
2:15.
15 minutes. All right. So less than half of what we recorded.
Correct, which is wild. All right, so we go into chapter 34 here. We lead off with a logbook section. It's quick, flash in the pan, just a very brief section. I never wanted to be feared. If I regret one thing, it is that fear I have caused. Fear is the tool of tyrants. Unfortunately, when the fate of the world is in question, you use whatever tools are available. That is so wild, because it also fits with the Lord Ruler's idea and the way that he does things, and it's just it's pre his millennia of rulership.
Yeah, this meshes pretty well with this sort of emo sad boy Lord Ruler that we see going forward. I mean, maybe that's why his soothing aura is like just oppressive depression. And I'm pretty sure canonically anybody influenced by that aura has Disintegration by the Cure just going on a loop in their head.
The album or the song?
The album, the whole album.
The full album. All right. So there's some upbeat moments, but like mostly it's down.
Mostly down.
Mostly down. You got Love Song in there, but that's really good. No, I feel that. It's such an intensely it's a really philosophical question. It's again the question of like, how do you lead? Do you lead through fear? Do you lead through being the one at the front of the line? Do you lead through pressing forward through circumstances, which again is something that like Sazed focuses on a little bit later, the idea of belief and faith. It all kind of fits. It twists into the right spot.
Yeah. I agree.
Cool. The scene setting for this chapter is fairly simple and I think very elegant. The idea of this red sun as a backdrop, ash falling, people running and dying all the while. The two powers begin to fight, the Inquisitor and Kelsier, and there's this fleeing crowd and all these sounds and movement and action. You can imagine the crowd fleeing, the camera shots as they move, but the two beginning to clash. It feels like a Jedi battle. I mean, like, I can't think of any better examples right now. It feels like the beginning of two Jedi facing off in the middle of a crowd of people.
Fuck, man. I don't know why. I just keep thinking about adaptations throughout.
Yeah.
This book.
It's a fine analogy.
We talked about it a ton during Red Rising, but I feel like we haven't talked about it so much during Mistborn. But it's still been in my head. Like, how would this look on screen? And I think this would be like just a back focused slow motion drone shot of like the whole square.
Interestingly enough, I imagine it differently. I think low to the ground, Ridley Scott, you watch people's feet, you watch them move, you see like panning up, and as the people split, that's when you come into focus with people already fighting each other. So that's
okay. So that shot for me is the introduction of the Lord Ruler walking in.
Sure. Yeah. That makes sense. That's a similar comparison. I'm just thinking of like The Last Duel is filmed kind of similarly in a couple of different
I haven't
scenes.
seen that yet.
Like, oh, it's so good. So good. Anyway, you're right. The slow-mo drone scene, like you can totally see it like panning up over top of the crowd as well. You can see there are so many different ways to visualize this moment inside the square, and that's eventually known as the Survivor's Square inside this chapter, or after this chapter. But the combat between the two here, I think, is absolutely incredible. Kelsier's use of the final Empire's soldiers basically as weapons against the Inquisitor is magnificent. His ability to like pull their armor and fling them around and like use them as jumping off and pulling points is incredible. I think it really accentuates his power in Alamancers too, and his specification, even as Vin highlights it, being like, I learned so many things from these other people, but I never paid attention to what Kelsier is really good at, which is pushing and pulling. Those two primary things. And this really accentuates his ability to do those things and to kind of have that balance of force, that yin yang of the energy pushing and pulling against him. It's an enabler of his personality, I think, in a big way, which is that he wants to be the revolutionary, but doesn't think that he should be the leader, and like has this kind of interesting ebb and flow. And I think that's accentuated here inside of this fight scene, even in a weird way. Like its personality permeates this fight scene.
Yeah. If this scene weren't so serious, and just the whole tone of this weren't so serious, a lot of this fight I would find fucking hilarious.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
He's just ragdolling soldiers wearing like metal armor bits because he kind of needs something to use.
I want to see James Gunn's Mistborn. Does that make sense? Like, I want to see James Gunn do Mistborn and just like allow those to be jokes, but also keep it serious.
Yeah,
like,
because I think that's like, what it is.
Mash the dude into the pulp on the ground, but also propel everything forward. Like, yeah.
I do love the use of the term "unfortunate" for the soldiers that get brutalized in that way, just out of circumstance.
Yeah. There's even one time where he's not sure what soldier he's pulling on and if he's on his side or not. And he takes it light on that guy because he's like, holy shit, I don't know what I'm doing. And I think that reaction's interesting too, where it's like you are dancing. I imagine it as dancing, I should say. Like the way that he's pulling and pushing himself. I imagine a lot of spinning, a lot of pirouettes, a lot of like because we know that they're tied to the axes in the moment of where you're doing it in relation to something else, I imagine twisting and the whole situation being so difficult to read, which is why he comes out on the other side of, some of these people. He's like, sorry, I didn't mean to do that to you.
Yeah. He's
so good.
He does a lot. Yeah. Certainly does a lot.
Pulls off a lot in these sections. We get a blink and you'll miss it moment where Kelsier just absolutely annihilates some archers. And this really gets into the benefit of deeply understanding the magic system, I think. This whole entire scene does, and even the last chapter. The fight is so believable and is only not utterly nonsense because it feels so ground reality, because we've been exposed to these bits and chunks and pieces of Alamancy. We get to see them all used at once in a kind of a brilliant orchestra inside of the scene, where we get to listen on the other side to the music.
Yeah. There is nothing that makes me happier about this story than the depth of the rules that are built into it. Like, the system laid before us is so entrenched in rules. It allows for us to completely excise, cause magic from our vocabulary in like describing why things happen in the way that they do. Because it is not our physics. It's not our world. It's not the way our world works, but everything is anchored to a rule that is consistent. And that's why I love this book so much, man. That's why, that's a major reason for why I love this book so much so far, is because it's so consistent in the rulings.
That is something that I think I got into in episode 0 when I talked about Brandon Sanderson's rule system as laws of magic, the equivalent of the laws of robotics, right? And I think that that's why Brandon's able to pull shit like this off, is because he follows his own version of that, but in his construction of fiction. So, as opposed to a tool of fiction, like the laws of robotics are inside of Asimov, this is external that influences the system. So, I totally agree with you. And now you've seen the results of that sort of consistency over top of a story, which I'm not going to say is unique. It's not unique at all. No. But the depth of which there are few people that are as consistent as Brandon Sanderson in this way.
Right. So there's a point later on in the story that it comes into question. It doesn't even come into question, but it makes me realize that I don't understand how this works, and know that they're just knowing how this has been written so carefully. I know there's a rule for it, and I understand that it's rooted in something, but it's different. So I don't know yet. And that's
your canons of probability have been set by your expectation and understanding of other rules of the system. So because you know how the 8 basic elementic metals work, you're like, oh, there's a new 11th metal and maybe something else introduced. Well, I don't understand it right now. I understand that everything else has been so well explained that I believe that it could fit.
Yeah. I'll get to it when we get there. It's the it's the point where it's the point where Vin is forced to burn another metal that extinguishes everything else.
Right.
And that comes in, it brings into question, how do the things internally work within the system, within somebody's body?
And also, does that metal have an alloy?
Well, there's that, but that's less to do with the actual properties of what's happening right now.
Yeah, right. I'm just saying, in general, any metal burned, we've learned, has an alloy. So it's, there's that, is there the opposite metal that might fill you with everything? Yeah,
probably.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing. So Ham finally makes his way over to Renew, Spook, and some of the other prisoners of his house when Ellen steps into frame looking for Valette, accosting Renew and holding him back while he's stabbed in the back by the Inquisitor. But I think one of the important things that happens in the scene is Kelsier's reaction to Ellen, where she says, I love him. She loves him, before he dives in and decides to save him from the Inquisitor that is clearly chopping through Renew, trying to get to him on the other side.
What kind of reveal would that have been, though? If it was, I love him.
Yeah, that would have been a very different moment. I recognize a lot of Marius in Elend from Les Miserables, especially this time around. I was trying to pay attention to some subtle things and trying to pick up on themes and stuff that Brandon would have picked up on. And Marius and kind of his friend groups and the revolutionaries and the people who wanted to be revolutionaries feels very prevalent here. And this feels like a scene in which you kind of wish would have happened between the opposing forces in Les Miserables, and we see it here. So
I have never experienced Les Miserables.
Oh, at the very least, the movie is enjoyable and a good way to like get to know it. It's not the best format, but it's a good way to understand.
Good deal. Yeah.
Anyway,
that's fair.
We kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we have some like MCU flashes that we feel here as we've been reading through this. But this book comes out pre-Avengers and pre-Iron Man. This book fight reads like an MCU style fight. It reads like this like very clean depiction of action that you can very clearly visualize. In particular, like the continual conversation that goes on between Kelsier and the Inquisitor, a little bit of like negging back and forth, and they're kind of having this like tug of conversation at the same time that they're having the action happen, and it's so well done and predates the MCU.
Yep. No, I definitely had this thought though. Superhero movie cinematic feelings throughout this entire section. So I'm glad I'm not the only one. I know we mentioned it before, but like we came to those conclusions separately. That like that's the feeling that's evoked during these scenes.
Yeah, and that would be one of the toughest things, one of the hardest things that I think that you would have to do on screen is explain how the characters understand where metals are or where metals go and like their reaction to them, because it's not as though Vin, like Magneto, is holding her hand out and needs to pull it towards her hand. It's just like center of body. So it's like gestures don't matter. It's what she thinks, what she burns, and the intent of the direction that she pulls on something internally that matters. So do you gesture with that? Do you like full body lean in? Do you full body lean out? It's such a weird thing. That's like one of the weird translations that it's not that it doesn't work. It's that there's no explanation. It's something that you would expect visually, which you would need to figure out. That's something that I think would be a component to like work on first and foremost.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think would go overlooked by a lot of people, and frankly, overlooked by me in the thoughts of how Alamancers works, specifically iron and steel.
Because if you're pushing off of something, it's not like Magneto.
Yeah,
like that's the hard part to
your hands Magneto, don't fucking matter. Your hands don't matter at all.
And everything with Magneto has all been like hand centric. And if we're talking about metals and like pushing, pulling, and whatnot, Magneto's our point of reference because he's the guy, he's the dude. So,
but even beyond that, even beyond Magneto, within the context of the book, you're dealing with them throwing things and then affecting them. So they're coming from or going to their hands. So you don't think about it not being directly connected to their placement of their hands, but it's not.
Like Neo taking off could be an Alamancers takeoff, right? Where his hands are at his side and he's Superman launching, basically. But it doesn't matter that his hands are at his side or if they're up. It doesn't matter if hands are up or down, in theory.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Matrix spoiler. Just kidding.
Matrix spoiler. Neo can fly.
In case you didn't catch one. Yeah, it's so interesting. There's a lot
if we're taking it that granularly, hand placement does matter because hand placement changes your center of gravity. If that's the definition of it's weird to think about. It's really weird to think about. Right. It's really cool though.
It's so well defined. Okay. We get brief flashes jumping back to Vin's perspective about the death of Renew, but also being told that he's a Kandra and that they are not certain that it is dead anyway. Thoughts about the Kandra?
So we talked about this last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, mentioning that the Kandra from the Venture house. I think I meant Tensoon.
Yeah.
Tensoon?
Tensoon? I think it was Tensoon.
I think it was Tensoon. And mentioning how it's similar to what we're seeing with Lord Renew. I'm not sure if I ever said that, like, I think he's the same thing. But I'm pretty sure I mentioned that he's utilizing similar principles. I think that's where I landed on it. It makes sense entirely now with the more context on that. They're both Kandras. They're both the same thing. And we get more context on more background on what that means. And that they're big growed up myth strays, basically.
It is big grown up Mistwraith. I mean, I think that's the point of what we're supposed to get, and we get a very. I think at this point, it's meant to be a very simplistic explanation to those who don't understand, because the more important information that gets conveyed later, that becomes more important at the time. So this gets into the reason that we addressed the question inside of PJ's prediction, but not the reason that we answered it, is because we don't have a holistic answer as to what a Khandra is yet, but we have a general understanding that whatever is going on with Renew is a Khandra.
Right.
And Tensoon's place is taking over the body of a servant within a different house is also that of a Khandra. So now we've got two different points of reference that can, at the very least, point us in the direction of the sort of necromantic arts that you talked about. I'm not strictly using the term, but
Yeah. But
yeah.
Yeah.
And we also get the origin point, which is big growed up Mistwraith.
Big growed up Mistwraith.
Yeah. Kelsier, of course, finally manages to duplicate the Inquisitor. Oh, duplicate, not duplicate.
Duplicate.
Kelsier.
Oh, no.
Kelsier
Oh, no.
finally manages to decapitate the Inquisitor after this brutally long fight scene, and then the Lord Ruler arrives. We finally see this man dressed in black with white accents and so well described, basically striding into the square. This book is often, I think, sparse with details when describing people at times, but this feels just long enough between the rings, pale skin, young complexion, and his attire. He kind of embodies this aura of menace with a simultaneously elevated regality. What'd you think?
So this feels like that stereotypical, really cool, big bad reveal in the best possible way. It reminded me, off the top of my head, of like the introduction of Kylo Ren. But going back and like looking at that scene, it doesn't match what I'm thinking of. So I don't know what exactly what scene from what movie I'm thinking of that this is evoking that feeling from. But like, I know for sure that there is a bad guy reveal that matches exactly what I'm feeling in this book in some movie. And I'll think of it at some point, but to the same effect as Kylo Ren, to the point where I think of the Lord Ruler as Adam Driver.
That's not a bad casting, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Weird tangent topic as far as casting goes. How do you imagine Kelsier?
Brad Pitt. I don't know why. Just
really,
I can't get that out of my head. Don't know why. It doesn't make any sense. It's not a good casting even. I'm just saying that like there's this weird. I get this weird Tyler Durden energy out of.
I always thought he was black.
Idris would be a great cast.
He's too old. He's too old.
He's too old.
He's too old.
That's a good.
But in the movie Concrete Cowboy, it's Idris Elba's nephew. What's his name? Caleb McLaughlin.
Okay.
Caleb McLaughlin is who I'm thinking. He might be too young. But I think you could make him look a little bit older. That's who I think of.
I think by the time this gets going, I think you might be onto something with that casting.
Also, if you haven't seen Concrete Cowboy, absolutely watch it.
So I had actually seen him in Stranger Things and I didn't know it.
Oh, he's in Stranger Things. Okay.
Yeah. There you go. But
gotcha.
All right. Dig that.
But like I was trying to like peg who I thought he looked like, and I just went on like a tangent myself earlier today. So I wanted to see what your thought was. Brad Pitt, I think he's too old. I don't think he's that old.
He's probably too old. I'm imagining, like I said Tyler Durden. I'm talking like 20 something year old Brad Pitt.
That is like 20 years ago.
Not current Brad Pitt. Like young George Clooney, even. Like,
how old is Fight Club now? Is that like 98?
1999, I think, if I remember correctly.
99? Yeah.
Point being 20 years ago at least. So, yeah. But like young, there's some like suaveness, and I can't disconnect it from the heist nature of the whole thing. Like, there's a version of this that exists. He's got to be kind of a little bit thin profiled, but like muscular. Thin profile, but muscular.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is why I really like your casting, because I think that matches really well. Yeah, I dig it. I hadn't thought about that.
I do think of most of the other members of the crew as older. Like Breeze, I think of as an older man. Like Breeze, I imagine to be like.
I think of him as like a suave 30-year-old.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I think of him as like 60 or 65-year-old. Like
really, I'd give
older,
Clubs,
older
I'd give
dude.
Clubs the eldest on the totem pole. Maybe Dachshund.
Okay.
Breeze feels younger than the rest, but not by a whole lot. Given, but
Ham feels like
a veteran. So like he feels old.
Yeah. I would say like 40s or maybe early 50s.
Yeah. That tracks.
For Ham.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is. Club or Breeze just feels Breeze and Clubs feel like the same age to me, and they both feel old.
That's within reason. I mean, I'm not disparaging. I'm just thinking about like casting. I feel like you'd want it'd be more interesting to give this crew a range, right? So to give it a range, Spook and Vin naturally have a range. Kelsier's on the younger side, and I think everyone else might tend to be older or close. And I think Breeze is the closest to Kelsier in age because they butt heads the most often, and they're often the two highest complainers. So I think of that as like a symptom of youth in my head. And everyone else feels wise, but they feel more youthful in that way. But
interesting. Okay.
That's just my take. It's not,
No, I mean, yeah. It'd be interesting to see what
casting
Brandon has in mind with these.
That would be a really good question. That would be totally a Brandon question of like, who would you cast as these folks? And again, written in 2006, he probably had a completely different cast list than he might have now.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. Fuck. 2006. Brad Pitt makes fucking sense. Like, within reason. Like, he's within reason. Even Idris Elba is within reason in a similar way. Yeah. Fuck. Because he's so good in The Wire. Anyway, we're going to shut up about that. We have an important topic to talk about, which is we get to Kelsier's death and the Lord Ruler walking through this crowd impaled by two spears, one man screaming, stabbing him for his wife, another screaming, stabbing him for the crowd. Just doesn't
fucking brutal. It's such a brutal scene.
He just keeps walking, ignoring them, ignoring all the people trying to pile onto him, and shrugs them off without ever really acknowledging them. Doesn't even like push them, like doesn't even use Alamancy on them in that way. He strides towards Kelsier. Kelsier delivers his lines that clearly feel prepared on his own in grandiose and rebellious fashion. But you can't kill me, Lord Tyrant. I represent the thing that you have never been able to kill. I represent hope. And he is then promptly backhanded so hard that he spins, spurting blood, losing an eye, all while the Lord Ruler then subsequently pulls a spear out of his chest, not caring about it again, indifferent to the pain, indifferent to whatever else this is, and slams it down through Kelsier before proclaiming for the executions to begin. This is a fucking brutal scene. This is the separation. This is the end of our mentor, the death of Obi-Wan. How'd this make you feel?
Oh, God. I was so excited. This so perfectly sets up our villain for the future. Like, this is the, oh, fuck, we're unprepared, turned up to 11. Like, I don't know if I'd say that this death is anticlimactic, because it's not quite. Like, we saw the entire progression, but, like, he just gets swatted down. literally swatted. Like, the Lord Ruler has just been so shrouded in mystery for us that I wasn't prepared for how utterly oppressive he is. Despite, like, in spite of his proposed godhood, like his purported godhood, I got to the point where I was assuming that it was overblown and that, like, this is just a dude.
And he looks like just
but no.
Yeah.
But no. Fuck. But this is the young visage of David Lopan getting run over by a semi-truck when he gets stabbed by two pole arms.
He just doesn't give a shit. He's just like, whatever, dude.
Yep.
He's indifferent to the whole thing. This is a moment that will go down in ska history, in theory, because this is definitely the biggest uprising that's happened in the last millennia, the last 1,000 years. And yet...
Okay.
Lord Ruler's like, whatever, dude. And I think this gets into something that, like, Vin only realizes because of this moment, which is that he will just kill forever. He'll kill indifferently. It doesn't fucking matter. He was hoping that he's created systems in which people self-regulate as much as possible. How do you stop that? How do you topple that?
Yeah.
And what do you do when you topple it? Like, on top of that, like, he's devised an economic model. Like, it's a whole thing.
I mean, there are comparisons to be made that maybe blow it out of the water, but I don't think it really does so much. This is a man with an anthill. Like, this is a man with a giant, really complex ant farm. And the ants are suddenly learning that somebody is technically in control of them. But what the fuck are they going to do?
And the man just sits there and he spins the ant farm in circles on its hinges.
But the idea of, like, calling someone an ant, I feel like is overused a little bit. And in this case, it's almost perfectly apt. As far as what I'm understanding, he feels so removed from the actual situation and so untouched by anything they do. And it's more of just observation than anything. And yeah, he can go in and, like, squish one ant that's causing problems. But, like, fuck, what are they going to do?
What do you fucking do? And, oh man, does that make the Lord Ruler a terrifying enemy? Especially one that we humanized through the logbook in his own way, right? Like, we've humanized this person over the course of time. We believe that he was brutal at the beginning. The logbook convinces us a little bit that it's otherwise. And we get these dissenting opinions about his godhood and, like, the nature of his being. And Kelsier's like, I don't think he's actually God. He's not the sliver of infinity. What the fuck does that mean? And instead, now we're presented with someone who is literally...
Unless this visage of him is not actually corporeal fully. And, like we see them both side by side later on from Vin's perspective of this old man.
Oh,
the old decrepit man, and then this guy who killed Kelsier standing side by side. Like, maybe one of them's actually vulnerable.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we're going to have to confront. Even worse, of course, from this death, this critical moment of failure and losing Kelsier as a part of everything, is Vin's reaction. Her screaming at his broken body after everyone has left and kind of fled in various directions, left there in the square. Her image of invincibility, even though she had down-talked and talked about the fact that they weren't invincible, she really meant she wasn't invincible, not that he wasn't, because he was always the mentor figure. He was the one. She might have been saying it to him, but she was saying it to herself. And it hurts. It's her model of heroism. They're dead in the square. And it's a tough way to end this part before heading into the next, especially as Reen's voice whispers in the back of her head that he told her that Kelsier would eventually leave her. From the very beginning of the fucking book, this fucking nagging part in the back of her head comes rearing back up. This trauma. You wish that kid would have never been born. You know?
Fucking Reen.
Fucking Reen.
Will you leave us alone for 5 goddamn minutes and just let us mourn?
Just give us a second.
Just a couple minutes, dude. Yeah, sure. Tell me that I'm shit and everybody's going to believe me. Yeah, I fucking know. Let me just think for a couple minutes.
Yeah. It's such a tough way to end this part. However, we thankfully get to continue through. This is...
Thankfully or not.
Thankfully or not, I guess, however you want to think about it. These 2 chapters, by the way, I don't know that I've told this story. I read this year upon the prompting of the vote for us to cover this because so many people had mentioned it, but I hadn't read it yet. So I read it back in July of 2021 for the first time and picked it up, started reading it, or June, rather, into July. And I was going and hanging out with our buddy Bill and was up in New York hanging out. We were chatting. We were up late one night, and I hit this 2 chapter section, and I read it, and I'm like, it's 1 a.m. I'd been drinking, I'd been hanging out, whatever, and I read it, and I'm like, oh well, I guess I'm not going to bed now. And so I just finished the fucking book. Didn't go to bed until like 2:30 in the morning. I'd been listening to the rest of it, but I brought the book with me just in case, because if I would have, I looked at the timer on Audible, how long it would have taken me in bed to listen to it. It was like 2 hours and some odd minutes. And I was like, I'm just going to read the book and see if I can go faster. Because like, I need to get to the end. I need it. And yeah, this was that breaking point for me for sure. I was like, if we lose Kelsier, what the fuck are we gonna do?
We still get Kelsier. He's just, well, he's the same bones.
It's just his bones. It's his bones.
He's got slightly different eyes. But that's
bones are his money, so are the worms. With that, we move into chapter 35 and part 5, Believers in a Forgotten World. It's a really interesting part divider as we think about like the headers for parts, as it's so divisive. Do you have any thoughts about what this could mean? What this could imply?
What is the logbook chunk?
The logbook.
Or do you mean the title? Or do you mean the title?
I'm talking about the title, just the Believers in a Forgotten World.
Like I'm just on a thread of the Lord Ruler is an outsider looking in, looking down on this like curated world that he's observing. So like that's what that evokes for me, but that's just because that's what I'm thinking about. So
well, in his own right, he's a believer in a forgotten world. He believes in something that existed before 1,000 years prior, and in turn, someone like Vin, through the image of Mare and Kelsier, has been given this object of desire that is also 1,000 years old in terms of the sun being yellow and the plants and the flowers being green and even having flowers to begin with.
So, okay, I completely flipped how I was thinking about that quote or that term, believers in a forgotten world. The way you seem to be describing it is like somebody believes in this forgotten world, as opposed to somebody who believes in something and is like passionate about something in this world that's completely forgotten.
Also true. I think both apply. That's why I think this part title is so good, because I think my implication that I gave at first was the like Mare, Vin, Kelsier perspective, and I think the other part that we need to consider is the logbook perspective, right? The Lord Ruler as he existed prior, and the way that he keeps this room in Critic Shaw, there's some nostalgic part of him that yearns to be back at that time, as he's like kept all of these belongings and whatnot, you know? Like, I think he's also a believer in a forgotten world in its own right. And he maybe wants that back, and maybe he can't get it back. And that's such an interesting problem for a fucking god on planet Earth, you know? Not really, but you know what I mean.
Planet something.
Kicking it off with the logbook. I know what will happen if I make the wrong choice. I must be strong. I must not take the power for myself, for I have seen what will happen if I do. Again, tied back into the part title, this is an interesting read.
Okay, so my only takeaway from that, or my biggest takeaway from that, and maybe no, I don't see a situation where it could be anything other than this. Realistically, all right. Fuck. How do I preface this? The fact that he says I've seen, or I could see, I have seen. Is that what it is? I have seen what it would be if
I've seen what it will do. Yeah,
what it will do. That tells me that Alamancers exists ahead of this, and he has.
Sorry. I have seen what will happen if I do.
Yeah. Either way, have seen. My assumption is Alamancers exists already, because I mean we know Fairchemy. Yep. We know that exists, but we also know he doesn't have access to it. This seems like something that would come out of exploring gold.
It's true. We do know that our Lord Ruler in the logbook doesn't have access.
No, this would be exploring the present of some different choice in the past. Like this is an alternate present with gold, what you see, right? That's how it's been described so far. Past self, but it was like the same age, wasn't it? Like it was Vin in the same age as if she had gone through a different path in the past.
Yes, you are correct that they're seeing different images of their own past, including potential paths that they could have taken, which is yes. Yeah. Point being, yes.
Right. Which this seems to be separate and inverted, I guess, of potential paths to the future based on decisions that could be made.
Correct. Yeah.
If this is actually him seeing something and not just him taking taking lessons from things that have happened before within history. So I don't know. I feel like he's actually seen the outcome and is trying to avoid it in like a time bendy Alamancers sense.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't know these powers well enough to really be able to make a solid prediction on it.
I think you've got an interesting read on the whole thing, right? Like, as you stated, the Lord Ruler in the logbook appears to not have ferrochemical powers, right? And so, in turn...
And is frustrated by them.
Right. He's frustrated by the terrorists, his packmen, having the ferrochemical powers, and he does not have access to them, right? And he talks about the sort of attire, he talks about a number of different things, but in particular, he seems focused on the potential of the future, which makes you feel like he's burning one of those metals that are predictive either himself in the past that he could take, or something like a advanced form of atium, maybe, or something in that realm. That would make you believe that he's got some Alamantic sight. But perhaps there's also the opportunity that it's all just fucking prediction based on his own shit from the terrorist people, you know?
Right.
So,
or maybe it's a vision imposed onto him by his terrorist people that are
right. Not his,
him.
he's not a terroristman. He's a Kaleniumite, but
Kaleniumite.
I made up that term. He's from Kalenium, so he's a Kaleniumite. Yeah. Kaleniumite feels the most right of that form. Kaleniumite. Right. It's like I don't know. Anyway, point being,
it's more guttural.
Yeah, and it's an interesting like little logbook entry for sure. Vin's grief, of course, at the beginning of this chapter is profound. This is her losing the first person that meant to her something beyond her brother, her mother, the sort of immediate familial relationships that she had, and arguably her father figure in a big way. And this is a depth of emotion that I think Vin has only begun to accept within herself, because she's gone and opened herself up to finally accepting other people into her life. It feels like a very lonely expression of her feelings here, but it's so important to who she is and who she's become. She feels Kelsier's absence profoundly, kind of wishing to just sink into the mists and disappear.
Yeah, this is yet again a great example of the growth that we've seen her come through. And like, what do you think she would have done when we first met Vin, if she was thrown into the situation and had the same familial ties to these people, but didn't have the like personal growth associated with it? I think she would have just fucking hid. She would have run and hid and driven herself even farther inward than she already was.
And down and away.
And down, yeah. Like, she does a very good job of living with but ignoring Reen's intrusive like comments. But I don't think she did before. I think that's why she was so reserved and so careful, I guess, with letting anybody in.
It's by no means anywhere close to perfect. That's some of the interesting struggle that happens here with Vin, and man, it's so hard to interrogate the way that she's changed, right? And the way that she's morphed and the way that she's adapted, because she's had to, by circumstance of like situation with Cayman and everything else, and she had to change to adapt to those things. But on top of that, the way that she's changed since joining the group, and how I think I totally agree with you. She'd burrow into the ground at this point to like hide herself away from humanity and anything going on. And at the start of the story was out for her own survival. That was first and foremost. It was about the things that I can bring, but at the same time, she did want to save her friend. She wanted to save, oh God, what's his name? It starts with U. She wanted to save her buddy, right? Because she believed in some minor form of friendship, and she had that belief, but it hadn't really been proven. It was a faith in people. And we've seen that faith be extended and grown in a big way towards other people. And Vin now hurts.
Does.
So she's of course left inside of this grief, and Sazed shows up and has this discussion with her, and I think he interrogates two things that I think are really important inside the story. We've mentioned it a couple of times. We talked about kind of some of these elements, but one being that he believes this was Kelsier's plan all along. This is something that's reiterated over the course of the next couple of pages. But the second being that of belief or faith. Belief, as he says, isn't simply a thing for fair time and bright days. What is belief? What is faith if you don't continue in it after the failure? And I think that this is a foundational kind of theme element that Brandon's really trying to pick at here.
Mm-hmm.
Why believe in anything if you don't believe it in the hard times?
Right. Yeah. It's a great point. And through this section, I think Sazed is clearly onto something here. We get more into it later, but the idea that this was the grand plan the entire time. And there's more to back that idea up with the rest of the crew later on, but even in the moment right away, just with what Sazed said, it absolutely seems like that could be true. Inspiring a religious or at least pseudo-religious uprising also gives us background into why he was so curious about all the different religions from Sazed in the past, because he was constantly asking him to pitch new ones.
Yeah, right.
But even those that he wasn't particularly interested in, they all had the common theme of being religions and therefore being something that tied people together and something that people worshipped, or like something that bonded everybody. And that's what he was looking for. That's truly what he was after. If everybody's right in this sense, that this was the plan the whole time, was to inspire an uprising and to become a messiah. Like it feels, I don't know, it simultaneously feels noble and
manipulative.
I wasn't going to say manipulative. Maybe. I don't really necessarily think manipulative, but maybe egotistical.
Which is kind of something that we've been mentioning with Kelsier for a long time, is he does feel like a bit of an egotist, right? Like he doesn't, he's not the most wholesome, and like he always has a motive, another secret. There's always another secret, right? Is kind of his whole saying. So I think I agree with you in large context and pretext about what's going on here inside of the story. I think that there's a lot of...
And I think I can agree with the idea of manipulative, but I don't think that was ever hidden. And I don't think that was ever even like pretended to be.
Yeah, right.
I don't think he ever pretended to not be manipulative, because
he was
the entire point of all of these like gatherings and all these meetings were trying to get people to agree with him and to join the resistance. And meanwhile, in the background, we've got Breeze doing everything he can to orchestrate a soothing, like, perfect storm of getting people to join.
Motivation and manipulation is a very fine line to walk. Like that's the line, right? Motivation and manipulation. And they're probably more on the side of a little bit of manipulation than motivation, but they're pressing on people's motivation, trying to encourage them to finally take action. Because
I guess, can you call it manipulation if all you're doing is pressing on already existing feelings?
Yeah, I think
like you're magnifying them.
Okay, so I don't think soothing is necessarily manipulation in the same way that we'd consider other things. Right. I do think what Kelsier was doing is more like manipulation than what Breeze was doing. If that makes sense.
That's fair.
As a delineation. Because all that Breeze was doing was inflaming emotions to make them more prevalent. He was just pushing them up a degree or two, giving people the ability to speak honestly, even on subjects. But instead, what Kelsier was doing is manipulating people to believe in his myth, to believe in the legends, he's creating a story. He's creating a narrative.
Yeah, but they're not wrong. They're not lies.
But he's still creating a narrative that's still like defined manipulation, like good or without good or bad. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that it's a good thing. I'm just saying manipulation is in general the idea of changing something based on your own perspective. That's manipulation.
So in that case, any sort of external motivation is by definition, manipulation. It's just whether or not
motivation is when you agree with it. Realistically, that's basically what it is. Those are the delineations. So, yeah. I think that's a wild part of human psychology. That's also why I really appreciate this book from a meta read perspective. Is the nature of rebellion is kind of tucked into this whole thing. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. It's good. It's good.
It's good.
It's good. I really like it. That's why we're still talking about it. But in particular, one of the things that I just want to make sure that we refocus on a little bit while discussing this is, you mentioned it earlier, Kelsier basically created the pseudo-religion. We've got this focus on belief in people believing in things, and the way that it's really important to like put your money where your mouth is in these situations. And that's where belief really matters, and where this focus really matters is, if you aren't offering up anything to sacrifice for something else, do you stand for anything at all? Like if in the hard times you do not double down on what you believe, do you stand for anything? I think that's kind of what he's getting at. Like, he's not fully, but he's like, belief is for the hard times and for the good times. And so believe you should.
Yeah. And I think ideologically, I agree with him entirely, but at the same time, I completely understand that when push comes to shove, you gotta look out for your own neck sometimes. Even if it means the downfall of everybody around you, and even if you would ideologically disagree with that happening, there's something
that's
to human
nature. I agree.
Human
with you.
nature, that's exactly.
That is the survival fight or flight instinct pushing back. I think what he's trying to get at is that that's understandable and acceptable, but at the same time, like, try to ground yourself. Not everyone can ground themselves, but that's the way that people should be. Not the way that people are, but the way that people should be.
Yeah. Kelsier just kind of seems like the kind of character that wouldn't accept that as a reason.
No, right, which is why I think he's always pressing into different religions. Totally agree with you there. Yeah. So he's asking these wide-ranging questions to figure out all these different things, and then in turn, like, pushing against some of them when he doesn't agree with them. So,
yeah.
Makes sense to me. Yeah. We gather up with the rest of our crew to witness something magnificent that appears, a belief, a faith, and a true rebellion among the people. Doxson puts all the pieces together as he witnesses this all come together. This really was the plan all along, not some petty heist, not some small-time robbery, but instead the biggest real rebellion that could ever be mustered from the Ska against the Final Empire. And we see that manifest, made real here through the martyr of Kelsier. Martyrdom.
Yeah. This is where those all the lights start popping up, right? And eventually entirely, the torches. There is some, it evokes some very particular symbolism that I can't put a finger on as to like what to call it. But like it is an illumination, and it is a rise of this myth, and like not a rise. It's a founding, I guess, of this religion. I guess you could make connections to Genesis with Let There Be Light to a certain extent.
Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting comparison. I hadn't thought about it that way from the rebellion and the lights turning on perspective. Interesting. I like that.
This is the birth of a religion in general, as opposed to, I mean, it is also a martyr. And it's
right.
It is also a Messiah, but it's strangely both an origin story and and martyrdom motivation. So it's hard to draw that line and make a connection, but I know I'm positive that there is some real world allegorical connection that Brandon was trying to make with these lights.
Far off. I don't think it's almost, it would be dubious to not say that this is definitely Christian derived in mythology. Like it would be doing it an injustice to say that this does not have a basis in Brandon Sanderson's faith in Mormonism. But
yeah. So who's L. Ron Hubbard in this one?
Iconography, but
that's L. Ron Hubbard, right? Or is that
Scientology?
That's Scientology, not not Mormonism.
Mormonism is Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith. Yeah. Never mind. I'm not familiar.
No one's expecting you to be a religious scholar here, PJ. So,
no, but I think it'd be maybe insulting to say that this is completely divorced from his personal views.
No, and it's within reason for that to be okay, and like it still makes for a great story. Yeah. It's all about the story. Like, beliefs aside, this is a fantastic story. Yeah,
that's fair.
And I sip my beer.
I think starting wars over it is a problem.
A wars over interpretation of it. Sure. Yes. Yeah, that's an issue. It sounds like a bunch of fandom members fighting against each other if you think about it for too long and hard.
You know, or long and hard enough.
Not a fandom. I mean, we're basically, if we think about it in current day terms, it'd be like the extended universe fandom of Star Wars fighting the canon fandom. You have your Old Testament and you have your New Testament folks. And,
I mean, even if you go back far enough, it'd be like,
the further I stretch this metaphor, the more
the mass genocide of Trekkies
at Abrams' feet. Oh man. Oh no. Oh fuck. But like, really, humans pretty much operate on these same principles, no matter what it is. Some of us feel very passionate about it, and people, like, I think we have been inscribed in part because of religion, in part because of our fascination of story and the way that we fixate on oral storytelling. This is our drug. And so, in part, we can understand that. But if you fucking correct me on age or height again, I swear to God.
I definitely clipped right there.
Yeah, there's no way you didn't. It's good. Okay, so the rebellion's mustering, of course. Vin also begins connecting the dots as well, and has the crew take off to a warehouse where they find weapons that Renew had been buying, as well as Kelsier's visage being worn by a Khandra, which is described as a grown-up Mistwraith, as you said. What a sight to finally know, and I can cheers you to say that you were onto it mostly. I was impressed, as were most of our Discord patrons, that you were so onto this in that moment. Because I was not in my first read, and most of our patrons did not know or did not track this. So,
I think that's...
Cheers. I'm drinking.
Oh, cheers.
You don't have to, but...
Well, I'm gonna. I think there's something to the predictions I get right. I think a lot of them come from the fact that we pour over these sections a lot more than you would if you're just reading the book. Like, we scrutinize things a lot more. So there are hints, and when there are hints, there's a lot more of a chance that we pick them up.
There's an assumption to be made. Yeah.
Like, for example, or not for example, but to make the comparison, we took a year, more or less than a year, but like 10 months to read the entirety of the Red Rising saga, right? Somewhere around there. I lent it to one of my buddies, and within a week he had finished the first trilogy. Like,
yeah, true.
We spent 5 months on those books, and he read them in a week. And just the amount of time that we spend in those chunks, I read each section at least 3 times, sometimes only 2 if it's a particularly busy week. But at least, like, usually 3, sometimes 4 or 5. So with the Mistwraiths and like with the Khandras and stuff, there are these hints that get dropped I would say probably very subtly.
And intentionally, though. Like, they're
very intentionally, there, yes. Right?
Yeah.
But they're small enough that you'd probably miss them if you're just reading through very, like you're just reading to enjoy something. Mm-hmm. And not to say that we're not reading to enjoy it, but you get what I mean. Like, we're approaching it differently than most people would approach these books. And I think that's why I pick up on some things more than some people would normally.
I don't disagree with that in the slightest. I feel like we read to the writer's intent, which is kind of like the entire point of what we're doing, right? Is to try to like pick this apart at a very granular level to understand the stakes, the themes, the characters at a very deep level, as opposed to, I'm not going to say surface, because I think people can get a ton from reading quickly through these things. They can pick it up because it's so dense with the information, but at the same time, we're picking out every single grain of detail for the most part and treating them all with equal discretion versus, my first read, I didn't catch a number of things, including the Khandra. Like, I caught the term Khandra, and I was like, that's fucking weird. And I caught, like, the idea of, like, Renew being suspicious, and, like, I had that concept, but I didn't draw the lines because I was reading faster than, we are right now. And I didn't have the same sort of granular approach in that read-through because it was my very first read-through. And now in this time, I'm like, oh, shit, the seeds are everywhere for everything. Fuck. We gotta talk about it all. So, yeah.
Yeah. But
that's
either way, it was satisfying to learn that I was mostly right.
Yeah, right.
Like,
it was.
I didn't.
I
genuinely,
was proud.
I wasn't sure. I thought it was a possibility, but I wasn't sure if the Khandra was the same thing that Lord Renew was.
No, you weren't. Right.
But I was pretty sure the systems in place were the same. Like they were drawing on the same sort of processes. So,
right. You had the general idea that while Renew, whoever Renew is or whatever Renew is, and Tensoon were similar, they're not the same.
So the thing that made me think that still hasn't been answered, and that's the fact that Lord Renew seems to have maintained his cognitive functions and his memories and his understanding of maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's all the same brain as whatever maybe these Khandras only live within this noble society, so they understand noble society so well that they are able to take over a noble person and fake it. But my hang up was that they had so much understanding of
to begin with
of noble society to begin with. It wasn't necessarily that it had so much to do with Lord Renew and his family. It was more just the interactions between Lord Renew and his family and the rest of noble society. So maybe that's what it is. It's like,
sure, there's a gradation.
I was just gonna make a fucking spoiler for Red Rising, but there's something very aptly similar in Red Rising that I think you know what I'm talking about for a 1-to-1 comparison.
Yes, now that you mention that, I am thinking about it, and I'm pretty sure I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that makes sense. Using the Khandra in this kind of way, as we've been discussing back and forth, is an interesting way to have Kelsier also get in some final words through Renew, right? And it's an explanation of sorts as to what he was planning and what he was thinking, and now that he's dead, since Renew has been in on this long game the whole time, he's been the one on the inside circle, really, this whole time. No one else seems to react knowing what's going on here, except for him.
Yeah.
Wearing Kelsier's body.
So this is the point where I just talk myself out of that understanding and that like thought process of the Khandra and like the old body and whatever. Like, does he have Kelsier's thoughts and could he give more explanations of what was going on? And I don't think that's true. I think he just knows what Kelsier told him or her or it or whatever these Khandra are. Yeah, that's my assumption, is they just remember everything and they are immortal or nearly immortal and just jump from body to body, maintaining their memories, and are able to fake it pretty well. In that they're able to take over bodies, they steal bones, they're bone thieves.
Right.
I mean, they're miswraiths. They're grown up miswraiths, as we said. So they're fitting into society as these people that they're assuming, or these identities that they're assuming. And I think they are able to basically remember more or less everything that they experience. So they're able to very, very quickly and easily assimilate into the structure that they've found themselves in.
Okay.
This is a thesis on the fly, if you will. Because until I started talking last question, I was under the idea that they took over the memories as well. So, like, this is me trying to iron it all out all at once.
Re-clarify, because it felt like there were some conflicts that I just wanted to make sure.
There were definitely conflicts, because the more I think about things, Crossland, the more I talk myself out of shit and like realize that I'm wrong.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yep. I'm glad that we get to talk about Khandra now, finally, in a real way, which is very exciting. The letters, of course, so we get this conversation with Kelsier basically through the bones, kind of like you were saying. It's through the bones. It's a relayed piece of information, but it feels like Kelsier's final words. We get his true words and testament, you might call, will and testament here, left out for the folks to direct them in terms of the roles that he thinks that they should take inside of the society and really guide them into the final steps of the plan and kind of also lay out what he believes they will do in the next step of the Empire. Effectively and peacefully, this kind of transition or idea of power. The letter to Vin, however, man, is the closest that I get to tears in this fucking book. It is really reads like this final emotional letter, gut punch, and the last note. He depicts their entire relationship. He depicts the way that she's changed him in his own right, and you see that manifest in the previous chapter relating to Ellen and the way that he dove in to save her or him, and the way that all of that has happened over the course of times, and it hits, but especially in the moment at the very end when he signs it off saying that Mare always wanted a daughter. And that's that moment where it's like, that's an adoptive thing where like he's always felt like her adoptive father. It steals your heart and it takes it out, it rips out and puts it in front of you, and it's like, fuck, dude. Like a lot of this is emotional, but none of it I love this book. I love this series. But this like really tugs on the heartstrings the hardest. Pierce Brown is abusive to your heartstrings. Abusive in the way that he like pulls on everything in every direction all the time. This is more sparing, and you get this intense moment of just like a yank. And this is a fucking hard yank.
Yeah. Their relationship between the relationship between Vin and Kelsier was so many things. It was, and we've talked about it quite a bit. It was master pupil, which turned into peer. It was from Vin's perspective, and it wasn't true, but right away it felt like it to her because of her untrusting nature. It was slave master almost. And that like very quickly got dispelled a little bit, and there was a friendship there. It was father-daughter. It was, I mean, peer, friend, father-daughter, master pupil, slave master. Like it was so many things, and it matured so quickly, but in a way that was like, it wasn't unsatisfying or like we missed something or like it was rushed. It just was a very, very hot burning relationship. And there were just so many threads of evolution within that relationship that it was such a cool thing to experience, man.
And that's why I love this relationship so much, man. It's so tough because at this point Kelsier's dead. And so we know that we have 2 more fucking books and there's no more Kelsier. And that's a hardship for me to swallow at this point in these books.
I mean, what is Kelsier at this point? We have his bones, we have his skin, we have his visage, probably his voice. Like, he's still around.
Kelsier's just a stack of bones. We're all just piles of bones waiting to dissolve. That's fine. That's fair.
Yeah. No, but yeah. I really, really appreciate that relationship specifically. I don't know. I don't know about the slave master comparison that I made.
That's a little aggressive.
It's aggressive, but what's the pared down version of that? Because Vin felt
employee, employer, like that's kind of
but not
indentured
quite.
Servitude, like
maybe,
yeah.
She felt like she couldn't.
Basically,
yeah. Which, I mean, what do you call that?
I call it voluntold, but you know,
voluntold. Like, yeah, that's fair.
She's volunteered, basically.
Yeah, it's aggressive.
Indebted.
It's aggressive to say,
you know,
slave master, but
yeah,
that's the feelings that I got off of their initial meeting from Vin's perspective of like, I have to be deceptive in order to get what I want here,
right?
Because I'm useful and they need me,
but
I don't feel like I can actually just leave.
Right.
So
Vin's final mission of the chapter brings her to the conclusion that it's her turn to play her part in this whole thing. we get all of these other roles, and as she's able to read them, we've got generals, we've got masters, we've got lords, we've got people who are going to be in charge of the economy. And Vin comes to terms with what she's going to be. She's going to be the assassin. She's the one who's been trained to be the back arm and the one that's going to take people down as she needs. And in order to play her part, she needs to get into that center room of Creedic that Kelsier tried and failed twice to get into by any means necessary.
What a fucking badass.
Hot damn, did I have a tough time not ending this week here? But I feel like it's better. Like, I had a tough time picking which chapter to end on out of these three, for the record.
So, she's right. First of all, every crew needs an assassin.
Right.
So, I pose this to you.
Okay.
Who's the assassin of our crew?
Tim Olson. No question. You'd think he's the tech guy, but he's actually the assassin.
Yeah, I can see that.
With that, we move into our final chapter of the week, chapter 36. I'll start off with a logbook entry here, of course, relating to Rashek. I've decided that I'm thankful for Rashek's hatred. It does me well to remember that there are those who abhor me. My place is not to seek popularity or love. My place is to ensure mankind's survival. This gets back to that like cold Lord Ruler that we've talked about a couple of times before. It really kind of tries to hone that in a little bit. What'd you make of this little short section again?
So there's a couple things that I want to know. I'm assuming, maybe I can't make that assumption, but the assumption is that all of these passages are chronological, and I don't know if that's true anymore.
I think, if I remember correctly, the big chunk that we got, the two big chunks that we've gotten from Kelsier and Vin, prove that it's not chronological.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, proves that it's not chronological.
So there's that, but it makes me think about, and I guess not being chronological helps my understanding of his thought process and his understanding of what he's going through and what he's going to go through. But the biggest thing for me when I was reading this was knowing that Vin has read this in its entirety. I just want her perspective and her thoughts on it. Because, I mean, one, because she has the entire context, and very explicitly we don't. But
there are two dramatic irony cheaters in this moment, right? It's this, like you're saying, it's this from Vin, and it's also Kelsier knowing what Kandra are. Those are the two big moments in this book that kind of mess with me a little bit from a meta perspective.
Yeah, exactly. But it's both from me wanting to know more about the context of what's going on here, and also me wanting to know how and if, well, I guess if and these passages are affecting the way Vin thinks about the Lord Ruler.
They're impacting
very directly
her thoughts. Yeah.
Because
they seem to relate to whatever the chapter is, right?
Yeah.
Another strong opening to this chapter, I think it really shows an interesting symbolic victory here for Kelsier, as what Mare had always wanted was a sky to be yellow, for the plants to be green, and for flowers to be growing underneath vibrant various colors. This was in large part her dream, and using the yellow light of the torches to illuminate the sky feels like the smallest of massive wins for Kelsier in that dream upon his death.
Yeah, I think this is Vin's way of finding him in these, like, post-death moments, you know? Like, Kelsier said the sun was supposed to be yellow, so, like, here's some yellow light. I think it's her maybe stretching a little bit and making connections where that's dubious to say that that's actually a connection to Kelsier. Like, yes, he inspired all this, but to say that torchlight is the direct comparison to yellow sunlight as it's supposed to be maybe is a little bit of a stretch. I don't know that she's
making that connection so much as we are, but
I felt like it was her because she explicitly, like, in her perspective, she explicitly mentions it.
Yeah, but I think that's just the loosest. Like, she's just looking for hope, you know?
That's what I felt like. It was more her making stretches to make connections to see Kelsier in these moments in order to be a motivation going forward and to, like, ground her in her actions and decisions.
It's sad and hopeful. you know? Like, it's got that moment of it for, like, looking back on those memories fondly as much as she possibly can and recalling all of the individual lessons. And this is just her. A lot of this is just, like, her sharpening those moments. Even, I think it was in the last chapter, and we didn't mention it, when she's inside of the weaponry room, she breaks off the tops of the arrowheads. She connects them with the like, little metal chain links that she breaks off that she's then going to use as a trick in the next part. But that's because she remembers how scrappy she is and how scrappy Kelsier was and how much smarter you have to be than other people to really succeed. And it just feels like it's executed in the same kind of degree, where it's in remembrance of Kelsier that she starts to think of these things and to try to, like, now that he's gone, someone has to be the next level thinker. Someone has to be, you know, ahead of the curve. Yeah. The tricks, as mentioned here, that Vin uses to bypass the Inquisitors are great, I think. It reminds me that she's always had to be this scrappy street thief level person for so long, and that this witty cleverness really comes through in a way that she uses the arrows and the powders even against them. It's such a cool moment when she throws up that powder, and we see from the Inquisitor's perspective that all of a sudden he can't map anything, so he knows where nothing is because there's all the powder lines to everything. It really leaves this interesting question, I think, about Inquisitors and what their powers, what their limits and everything are. They feel more like Alamancers, kind of, but not really, but like kind of.
They do. To me, they do. I don't see any powers that
they're not
aren't
registering different powers. Yes, right.
Yeah, there's just enhancements that make them a little bit more consistent, I guess.
Different.
So, but you mentioned her kind of being scrappy.
Yes.
And I think that's a perspective that doesn't get utilized within this space so often. And that really gets kicked off before she gets in, when she's talking to the guards in front of Creedic Shaw.
And shit, did I skip that? I totally skipped me talking about that. No, holy shit.
No, you're good. But that conversation really kicks off this chain of events of her being scrappy as a Mistborn.
And also being fundamentally different than Kelsier.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Entirely different. And like she's able to talk her way out of... She leans on these social things that are happening and uses Alamancers to soothe riot. I think she riots. I think she riots in this case. Emotions, like, gets these 4 guards to leave her alone and let her go through, and like they go and join this fight. So it's simultaneously recruitment and subterfuge.
Right.
It's a perfect duality there. Of those, like, of what she needs versus what the crew needs, and like applying one thing to get both. And like you mentioned, Kelsier would have done this entirely differently. He would have slaughtered these guards, or completely avoided them if possible.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to even compare them as like their tools in their tool belt, right? Like, Vin thinks of the entire tool belt, and instead, Kelsier has always acted like a blunt instrument. And I think some of that is the teaching and the lessons that were imparted to Kelsier versus to Vin. Vin got to learn from everyone, got this depth of knowledge of all of these other tools inside of Alamancers. Meanwhile, Kelsier is this blunt instrument of pushing and pulling. And so what's he do best? He does what he does best, and he's violent. And that's what we saw in his final scene. He's great at being violent. And that's cool to see, but at the same time, it doesn't make a perfect Mistborn. Which is what Vin is.
I mean, she is, but I think part of it is the fact that she's gotten...
Yeah, but...
That's fair.
Yeah.
But a big part of it is her training and her diversity in training, in that she got very particular training in each Alamancers group from different people who were experts at it. But at the same time, like, if these tactics were known at all, they would be used. Kelsier would use these tactics if there was anything suggesting that he knew about them. So, like, she's is scrappy, and she's exactly innovative and ingenious. Mm-hmm. So, dude, like, fucking pewter powder just getting blinding an Inquisitor. But that also means that they understand more about the Inquisitors than we do.
I don't think it does. I think she was guessing based on. She
Okay.
makes an assumption that it worked at the end. She didn't expect it to work. So she
fair.
she actually even like goes through that like motion where it's like, thank God that worked.
Yeah.
I think she was just hoping for that in particular, that trick to work.
Yeah. At the
And she
very
could have tested
least,
it on herself, but like
she could have, but that's dependent on the Inquisitor always having iron going or
that's
steel
true.
going.
Or either. Yeah.
Either. Right. So I can see the uncertainty of can they see through it and can they like see past it? But relying on it at all and having it be an option that it's off sometimes is tough to, or can be turned off, is tough to believe that she would put that much care into it with just on a whim, like maybe they can't turn it off and happen to be right.
But it does kind of feel whimsical, in its own way.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
She's
But
approaching
at
this
the
with
very-
her scrappy, assumptive nature,
At the very least, it was really informative for us as readers,
Right.
getting to know the Inquisitors better.
Could not agree more. I think that it is a very interesting scene in all ways, shapes, and forms. Thank you for
So
bringing that up.
my one question that I'd like some clarification on, and maybe I just missed it, but the broadhead arrow, like the arrowheads that she has small bits of metal attached to loosely. Was it chain link that she uses? So is it just like clasped onto it loosely so it can be like,
That's
if you
my
throw
imagination. Yep.
it up? Okay. My question is, how does she make sure that they're aligned so they can be propelled in the proper direction, but not reverted? Because they have to be going, like they have to be lined up in order to push, but still be loose enough to be like, to not pull it backwards if they get pushed on the other way. Like I'm trying to figure out how she could so reliably set that up in order to be able to push them without risk of having them returned.
That's fair. I think she did risk that. And this is one of those small things. This is one of the most minor of edits. I would have loved if there would have been a small mistake here and one of them would have been like too tight or something, because it would have explained that the rest of them were just set right,
Yeah.
Like, that's a small thing I think I agree with you on, but we can both interpret that there's clearly a fine line there that exists that she just measured perfectly. Because she is an Alamancers and can she could have toyed around with this in theory. She's not going immediately from the weapon room to Creedic Shaw. She has time between A and B. And
I agree with the delineation of internal metals cannot be affected by Alamancers. I agree that has to happen in order to make the fighting make sense, but I want to know why.
Do you mean metals that are inside of someone? Because that's different than internal metals. Okay.
Metals that are inside someone.
Okay.
I want to know why that's
ingested
the case.
Metals. Yeah.
Yeah, or even metals that are piercing, or the Inquisitors that have metal just spikes through their faces.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it internal? Not so difficult.
I get it.
Having internal being
right. Internal means you're doing something inside. External means something else. Ingested to be used.
Right, but the eyes, the eye spikes. What are those? Pierced?
Yeah.
Well, it was the same as her earring.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That she didn't have to worry about because it was inside of her technically.
Piercing. Yeah.
Why is that? Where? That's the only it works because it's magic and that's how it works. That I can I don't understand. Maybe for now, but in that respect, fairly major component of blood is iron.
As long, yeah, that's that. Ultimately, I think
to the point where if you have a strong enough magnet, you can manipulate
you can fuck with people's
blood.
hearts. Yes, right. You can literally make people have heart attacks. I totally understand. I think that's likely why, though. That's probably a big part of the reason why is because then you have to explain this entire different biological system, and you need to do this whole thing. But I'm sure, PJ, I can almost guarantee you that there is a reason here.
So, but does that mean coin shots have basically infinite power?
a great question.
If one of the main components of their blood is the metal that they use, are they perpetually anemic because they're constantly using their iron reserves?
So it doesn't need to be in your stomach in order to burn it. Like that's a known. That's a thing. I'll say it's a
Is
thing.
that true? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a thing for sure.
Well, then I don't understand the eyes of the Inquisitors at all anymore.
Well, maybe not. She breaks into the room and finds it odd, homey, strange, filled with old things, yellowing paintings, and an old man in a chair who spins to see Vin as she explores this room. This, of course, is the Lord Ruler. Out of options, as she's confronted with the Inquisitors also re-entering the room, healing themselves up, she burns the 11th metal and sees two different figures appear. One, a happy burly man in large furs, and another, a smaller merchant, kind of aged and huddled over a little bit. What's going on in your head right now, given the 11th metal, given what we're seeing inside of the deep chamber of Critic Shaw? What's going on? What you thinking?
I mean, I think I mentioned this before, but this evoked feelings of Big Trouble in Little China and David Lopan very, very explicitly. The person in furs was the guy standing next to the Lord Ruler, like the old, decrepit Lord Ruler that was Vin pegged as the person that killed Kelsier, correct?
Yes.
And the hunched over merchant dude was the guy standing next to the Inquisitor, I believe.
Think so? That feels right. Yeah. Right.
So it wasn't two separate visages of alternate Lord Rulers. It was like one.
They were past versions. Yep. I made that mistake. Thank you.
No, you're good. Just making sure I read that correctly.
You are correct.
So, I mean, it makes me think there's something more to gold, like we've talked about. And clearly, just the way that Vin mentioned, there's something to the 11th metal that's connected to it. It sort of follows the same internal, external pattern of the other metals, potentially. Gold being internal as a means of reflection on an alternate, an alternate past. And the 11th metal being external because maybe there's a tangibility to it, and that's what I'm thinking of the whole gold thing. I don't know.
Well, we've been introduced to Alamancy in general, and now we've got this Alamantic theory, right? So now we're trying to figure out where the shit places on the table, where which is the ally, which is the internal, which is the external metal, right? That's what you're tracking right now is can I interact with that versus a gold shadow I can't do, or maybe I can with a gold, maybe I can't with this 11th metal. Maybe A-Team is in the completely wrong category. It's not the 10th metal, it's fucking something else.
Yeah. A whole lot, man.
Yeah, right? Any other thoughts on the room, on the Lord Ruler? Anything else there?
No, that's what I've got right now. We've talked a lot about our feelings in general, but just fucking Lopan.
That's fair.
Fucking Lopan.
Ellen's scene here sets up this strong foundation for him, I think, as a character. Finally seeing the opportunity and doing the right thing in the face of adversity. The adversity, of course, is accompanied by his despicable father seeing Ellen as a fall man for the family venture, and so that Straff can keep on keeping on. Fucking piece of shit. But Ellen comes to this term, and he's like, I can be who I want to be, and I realize that I am also on the wrong side, and decides to turn himself fucking in. That is profound on his perspective.
There's a lot to it. First of all, Lord Straff Venture, what an absolute garbage heap of a person. Fuck that dude.
No character ever treats their child that way, so far as I can remember. Outside of fucking what's his name that throws Faramir off the burns Faramir alive almost.
Yeah.
There's that whole thing. I'm saying that wrong. I'm entirely incorrect. You get it.
No, I knew what you're talking about though.
Died, but yeah. He's alive. Never mind.
It's kind of a win-win.
Kind of, yeah.
Ellen wants this position right now for his path forward. And I think was kind of assuming he was going to have to fight his father for the opportunity to do this. And his father gets to just wash his hands of it. Yeah, fuck him for using it as an opportunity to let his son be the fall guy, but his son was asking to be this, like, in this position. He wasn't necessarily asking to be entirely in control of the Venture household within the city of Luthadel, but he wasn't gonna push on that. Like, it's separate goals entirely, and fuck him for his motivations, but who gives a shit at this point, because it's what we need.
Kind of, yeah, that makes sense. It's what he needs, for sure. Not necessarily what we need. Like, it's an interesting thing, because, like,
we as in, like, us within Ellen's
yes, right. It's exactly, yeah, totally agreed there. I was going to say, like, it's really like what we want for Elend, and it's Elend following through in his philosophy, which I think is a huge deal for his character.
Mm-hmm.
This is him jumping in our previous perspectives of him. He was kind of like wishy-washy on the whole idea, and we've only had him 3 times as a perspective. And so this is finally him solidifying, no, I agree, ska oppression has been a whole problem. I'm going to go turn myself in. This is what we're going to do to handle this. And that leaves us in an interesting predicament with him. So,
yeah.
Oof. We cut back from there, of course, because we're going to send Blanche to Vin being forced by an Inquisitor to swallow an unknown metal, depleting her reserves. Depleted of those reserves, she ponders the metal, like maybe a wizard might ponder an orb, and considers that maybe the pairings of themselves are off to begin with. And we've kind of talked a little bit about Alamancers theory, but did you have anything else that you want to approach on the idea? Or on this metal that she has to burn?
So this metal poses problems for me.
Okay.
Why am I constantly forgetting how to say fuchemery?
Feruchemy.
Feruchemy. I want to know what the implications of this metal is, with if it's applicable, because it seems like there's more or less...
I can search this. This is so much fun for me.
A 1-to-1 like mapping of Feruchemy and Alan. And how would this affect a physical representation of somebody's powers that are being imbued? What does that mean? What are the rules of how things are being burned? Because we know that it is a physical quantity of a certain metal that is ingested that directly relates to the amount of that reserve that you have. So what does this metal do to those physical representations of that reserve within your body? Or is it just inhibiting your ability to access them? And if that's the case, is it temporary? And like, given the amount, like given enough time, will that wear off and you'll suddenly have your access to the reserves again? I ask that because I'm still assuming that Vin will at some point be able to access the earring, like Sazed's earring that she swallowed.
Oh, okay.
Because
I thought she tried back up. I don't remember if she did or not. I thought she.
I don't think so.
Okay, maybe not. Anyway, yeah.
I didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
I don't
recall. I don't recall perfectly. That's fine.
All I know is that she wasn't able to access the reserves that it gave her.
Provided, yeah.
I don't know. This is a new thing that seems to bend the rules that we've been presented with and that we've been like following very closely. So I'm not saying that this circumvents the rules. It just means that there are more rules that we haven't had visuals on.
That makes sense. That's a reasonable call. I don't
and
disagree
I want
with that
to know what the rules are.
I want to know what the rules are. I feel that. I definitely understand. I'm closely watching my DoorDash driver right now because sometimes they drive to the wrong fucking building. This unknown metal, I think, is really it poses this interesting question on top of the entire Alamancers theory, as does the 11th metal, right? Like does this fit within the table? Does this not fit within the table? Is this inexcusable in its own right? Image sent. You know, I think I made mention of this earlier, and I wanted to correct a mistake that I thought that I made because of people being critical of things that I've said or otherwise, like small errors, which we started this whole podcast episode out with. I said that Davidian was in charge of the Steel Ministry, which was a slight mistake. He's in charge of the Canton of Orthodoxy, which is in the Steel Ministry. But he still kind of has an authoritative position inside of the political circle, which is kind of what we discuss over the course of this whole section. But, of course, the Inquisitors are on top of him. They're chasing him, and they're trying to figure him out to, like, push him out of the inner circle here with the Lord Ruler. Up in one of the spires, we've pushed Vin up, and we're watching outside the semi-glass window above the mist and kind of near the mist as they entangle with the glass. And Carr, an Inquisitor, accuses Davidian of not being judicious enough with the Ska women he bedded. This, of course, is an egregious error on his part that has led to this rebellion indirectly in the long run, and Vin being here, of course, to begin with. On his word, the 6 Inquisitors in the room, on the Lord Ruler's word, the 6 Inquisitors in the room howl with excitement and dash across the room to absolutely eviscerate this man that was Vin's father, the last member of the noble line of Tikil. Full-blooded noblemen. But, whoo boy.
Boy howdy.
Boy howdy.
So, this whole scene, for me, makes the Lord Ruler seem even more godlike. Like, in the sense that these are all people that are so far below him. Like, they're basically just playthings or pets. I'm not sure the right way to describe it.
No, but
it's not even that. Because it's more observational than that.
Sure.
It's not quite to the level of like just looking at ants or looking at a fish tank, because he still interacts with them and they still like are able to bend his ear a little bit, but more or less he's entirely removed from their interactions. And like he's basically indifferent to their infighting. All these factions below him, be it the Inquisitors or the Orthodoxy, the noblemen, the Ska, like these are all just factions, and he's completely elevated above them. I can't tell if it's entertainment for him or if it's a means. Like he mentions in the logbook that this is like, I think it's the logbook. I think he mentions like this is his ability, or like he wants to preserve humanity, essentially. Maybe that's the last logbook, like the one that we end on. I can't remember.
I think that's right. I think it's about the sun, but yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's different. But it feels like these interactions with these higher elevated levels of his populace seem to be more of a means to an end to make sure that the entire realm doesn't devolve into chaos and annihilate everybody. But he doesn't seem to actually care so much about the individuals or the laws that they break.
I think you made mention of this earlier, but this is a reflection of his policy with the noblemen, right? Like he talks about that explicitly here, where it's like, this is fine. This happened. I do this every century. I hope that this happens every century, or I encourage it if I need to. So this is just a little bit different, and I'm okay with that being a little bit different because it keeps everything else in line still.
Yeah.
So
and it's less direct work for him.
I said it 4 times there, but he is indifferent to this whole thing. Like,
yeah,
fine, whatever.
Entirely indifferent.
Yeah. He's embracing his own godhood in sort of this moment, and that's so interesting, especially in this revelation. And in like, this is the most we kind of see of the Lord Ruler, right? Like this is one of these specific times that we get to spend all this time with him. What do you think of him and his reaction to Vidian's betrayal and his lying, right? Like what do you make of that character choice?
I mean, it was emotionless, man. Like, he didn't care. Yeah, he set rules forth for the Inquisitors of like, this is when you can eviscerate somebody when you prove to me that they've done wrong or whatever. But he didn't give a shit about who it was that was being eviscerated. It was more, that's why I got to the idea of entertainment within it. Like this is an experiment for him. I don't know the right way to describe it, but
yeah, I would disagree slightly on entertainment. I know that we just went through this a little bit, but like he's not getting any joy out of this, really. Yeah. Like he's not There's no joy extracted here. It's mostly just like utility. All of this is utility.
And he didn't seem offended by the wrongdoings.
No, he's just like, you fucking broke the rules. Goodbye.
Yep.
You are the weakest link, but just the newest weakest link.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting concept, and I think it'll become a lot more clear when we understand the scope of what he's actually seeing and what he's actually like experiencing, if we ever understand that. But for now, he just seems to be on an entirely different field of existence.
Totally. Yeah. He's in a completely different world. He's playing a completely different ball game, it seems like. Yeah. And anything else, dude? I just want to open this up just because we've hit this like wide-reaching section, and there's a lot that we've talked about. There's a lot that I feel like even we could have dug in more on, especially given that this is only 50 pages. Anything else?
I mean, between what we just talked about and what we've talked about throughout the rest of this episode, I think we've hit everything that I wanted to like mention. I'm positive I'll think of things that I wish I said, but that's just
there's definitely more to
it.
pontificate on, but you know.
Yeah. But for now, I think we're good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, then we move into the final bit of reading here. This is the logbook chapter for chapter 37. There are only 3 chapters that we're going to be reading next week, PJ, for the record. We've got 2 chapters and an epilogue. So, is there anything more beautiful than the sun? I often watch it rise, for my restless sleep usually awakens me before the dawn. Each time I see its calm yellow light peeking above the horizon, I grow a little more determined, a little more hopeful. In a way, it is the thing that has kept me going all this time.
So this will probably entirely contradict what I just said about him being on a different plane of existence, basically between like him and his subjects. Mm-hmm. But maybe the fact that this is so inspiring for him and is pushing him to continue going in the face of seemingly insurmountable adversity and evil. Like maybe this is the reason why the sun isn't visible like this anymore, as a means to not provide hope for anyone trying to overcome his rule. And I don't know the functions of how the sun is perpetually red. I was assuming it was because the ash is just constantly falling and it's diffusing the sunlight, but who knows? I don't know. I'm not sure what to make of it. Given my like thoughts on the rest of the story and the Lord Ruler, this feels to contradict that.
Interesting. And I hate that I have to say that so often. And it's just my phrase for thumbs up. We'll move forward. Yeah, I mean, like, what do you say? I really wanted to also, like, bookend this. This conversation kind of spans the idea of the sun, the yellow, the glow, all of that being important and critical. And there's kind of a nice undertone there, too, to the whole story. So, you know, it just feels right, feels appropriate on top of the components that you mentioned. With that, we are going to move right into our question of the week. Our question of last week, PJ, was...
favorite example of torture.
Cool. Do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'll kick it off with my own.
All right.
We got really, really great like
responses,
representation of like responses. It was a great week for that. So mine though was the torture scene in The Princess Bride. And I know that feels like a joke answer.
Kind of.
But like putting the comedy, like obviously there's a lot of comedy to it. But if you put that aside and ignore the fact that it comes off as like a fucking cartoon, it combines torture for the sake of torture with like straight up human experimentation and like fascination with what's going to happen to this mind when I like
put the suction cups on him. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it could be a real horrifying circumstance for torture. Like if it wasn't set up in a comedy, you know?
Well, yeah.
But even so, it's a really cool commentary on human experimentation and the forward driving of science and what cost that could bring. So
I
don't know.
What an insightful answer. What a good answer. I'll end mine. I'll bookend this whole thing with my pick, but we'll move forward. So Artificer from our Discord, the book version of The Hobbling in Misery. Just thinking about it makes me cringe. And my dude, could not agree more. In the movie, PJ, have you seen the movie Misery?
I've seen this scene. I haven't seen the movie, but I have seen this scene. You need to watch
the fucking movie because the movie stands up to this day. My first watch actually happened in 2021. I'd only ever seen the scene. I had never watched it. I'd read the book, but I'd never watched it. I watched it this last year. Fucking holds up. It's so fucking good. Wow. That would come out today and would win Academy Awards for performances like it should. But in the book, so in the movie, of course, it's you take the sledgehammer to the ankles. But in the book, she cuts his leg off. She cuts it off from the knee down. So like he's going nowhere. And she's a nurse and cauterizes it. But then he can't go anywhere. He can't move the same way.
I feel like breaking it is more horrifying.
Well, it starts broken, but then she cuts it off when he rebels. So like that's the thing. Like,
okay.
But yeah, right. So it's ow. Oh God, no. Oh no, stop it. Feeds it to the fucking pig. It's so bad. Ugh. Good one. Good one. Next up.
Ivana from our Discord. Man, I'm going Star Trek again. Paralleled with 1984. The Cardassians torturing Picard. How many lights are there?
That's that whole scene, right? Like the bright lights, count them.
And Winston Smith in Room 101 in the Ministry of Love.
Yeah. 1984 makes me pained. It hurts. Every time someone brings up like the opposite ministries, I'm just like, fucking the Ministry of War, Ministry of Peace, like that. Man, George Orwell, what a dude, what a guy,
what a dude,
what a dude. Storms, another of our patrons here, suggested the gluttony, sloth, and lust deaths in Seven immediately came to my mind, but I actually think the worst is the time in Hannibal, the show, when someone is made to eat their own body piece by piece in a series of lavish dinners. It's that psychological aspect of torture for me. And I love the Hannibal TV show. The Hannibal TV show is so fucking good and criminally underrated. I watched that over 2021. Nearly my favorite thing. There's one other contender. But for a piece of media like half a decade old that I'm so late to, holy shit, was it good. Next one. Let's see.
So Marcus Huntsman on Discord. Aelin in Kingdom of Ash from the Throne of Glass series. I am not familiar at all with any of those terms.
We are going to be talking about Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass. Not you. You're not a part of this. I'm just kidding. But on the February 14th episode, no doubt that will be a part of our Valentine's Day romance podcast episode. Not to say that is particularly romantic, but it fits into Sarah J. Maas's compositions, and there are some romantic elements that are tucked inside of that. So we will be discussing it. It's inside of our notes already. Not that we've recorded that yet, but I know we'll be there. So good call, I think, from my perspective.
I agree.
With that, we move into Summit from our Discord. Again, this is a Red Rising spoiler. I feel like I need to make it because I know where Red Rising is. This takes place in the third book. If you are looking to avoid the spoiler, skip ahead just a little bit. For me, it absolutely has to be Darrow in the box at the beginning of Morning Star. Just knowing the months of physical torture he went through just to be left in darkness with only his mind is unspeakably horrific. This is such a fucking good call. I can't believe I didn't immediately think of this. This is a terrifying version of torture that we've talked about for episodes and episodes. It permeates the second series. It creates our primary theory for Darrow versus the Reaper.
This was my answer, but I can't just be like, no, that's my answer. So I had to think of something else.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
But if you want to hear our takes on all of this, you can go back
listen
and
listen to everything from Morning Star forward in the Red Rising series.
Exactly.
Our Red Rising series on this, yeah. And then finally, our last one before I go.
once again, Discord, Sharkbait.
Patron.
Our patron Discord. I think it was all from Discord this week, right?
Yes, because I got the Instagram post up so late, so I don't.
Yeah,
that's my fault. My bad.
It's an issue with us releasing a couple days before we actually record. So
yeah, right.
It's how it goes. But literally anything involving fingernails or eyes. Caleb poking out Xander's eye in season 7 of Buffy scarred me for life. But the best torture in a book has to be Reek and his whole situation in Game of Thrones. Yeah, I haven't read the Game of Thrones books, but from what I understand, the entire sort of arc with Reek is pretty close to true to the books. Maybe not entirely, but like thematically close to true to the books for the TV series, and that was fucking awful. So
his character breaking is one of the worst things. Like, it's incredibly portrayed. It is so well done by Theon's actor, but it is horrifying in concept and practice. To round it out here, I'm going to provide one that I can't fully answer, but what I will instead say, because it truly is my favorite example of this, is there's a character in Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie, the 4th book inside of the First Law series. It's the first standalone, of whom goes through a horrific torture and fundamentally changes them. And wow, there is no other example of a character changing in a moment that I have ever seen, ever. I am continually blown away by this. That's why it's in my top 5 books of all time. And I can't skimp around this one. That's why it's here. That's part of the reason that it's there. So, yeah, it's in Best Served Cold. You have to read First Law. We're going to read it eventually. I refuse to not let PJ read at least the first 4 books of the series before the series is up, before our podcast dies. Just kidding.
Well,
never die. Hope never dies. Yeah, that's the plan. So, whoo! All right. So, a bunch of sad down moments that we're ending the episode with on a down episode in general because we lost a main character and we're left in a really bad spot with Vin. Our question for next week is much better, but it's, what's your favorite sacrifice or martyr? We want to know. We want to hear about your favorite plot, sacrifice, or martyr in any context. You know, the first one that comes to mind is the Terminator in T2. Like, you know, think about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Imagine, dream, wish. Yes, quite. Next week, we'll be reading chapters 37 through the end of the fucking book. We're finishing our first Brandon Sanderson book next week. PJ, it's not that many pages. It's like 38 pages. It's not that much.
I'm going to finish it like in an hour.
You're probably going to leave here, read it, and be like, fuck. I'm very excited for you to disrupt all of your own theories that you've already been through. It's going to be a great time. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as we do every time, Tim and Andrew, for helping us make sure this show exists. You can check out all of our links in the show notes. You can find our schedule, Patreon, previous episodes, our websites, all of our social media accounts, everything all in one convenient location.
We also want to take a second today to thank our new patrons, Tip Jar patron Caleb and Jonathan Sisson, our new mixologist. Thank you a million for supporting the show.
If you would like to just straight up search for our social media accounts, you can find our Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit at wordswhiskeypod, and our email address, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com. And if you'd like to become one of our patrons, patreon.com/wordsandwhiskey.
Thank you so much for your support. It really means the world to us. We can't wait to wrap up this book with you next week.